Standing in the middle of a flooded intersection with rain hammering down like bullets, Ethan Cole had exactly 3 seconds to make a choice that would destroy everything he thought he knew about survival. The woman trapped beside that stalled Mercedes didn't look desperate. She looked dangerous. Soaked designer suit, dead phone, eyes that could cut glass. Every instinct screamed to keep driving, to protect Sophie asleep in the back seat, to stay invisible like he'd learned to do since the funeral. But something about the way that woman stood there, not begging, not waving, just waiting like she'd already decided the world owed her nothing, made him hit the brakes. He didn't know her name yet, didn't know she could end his poverty with a signature or bury him with a phone call. All he knew was that stopping would change everything. He just didn't realize how much. If you're watching from anywhere in the world tonight, drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far this story travels. And if it hits you the way it hit me, smash that like button so I know you're out there. Now let's dive in. The rain came down like the sky had finally given up. Ethan Cole's pickup truck crawled through the waterlogged streets of downtown, windshield wipers beating a losing battle against sheets of water that turned traffic lights into blurred halos. His hands ached from gripping the wheel. His back screamed from 8 hours lifting boxes in a warehouse that didn't give a damn if you had a kid waiting at home. And his daughter, sweet, impossibly patient Sophie, sat buckled in the passenger seat with her piano folder clutched against her chest, like it might dissolve if she let go. "Dad, you're going the wrong way." Ethan blinked. The intersection ahead had turned into a small lake, water rushing past the storm drains faster than the city could handle. He'd missed the turn 2 blocks back. "Yeah, I know." His voice came out rougher than he meant. "We'll loop around." Sophie didn't argue. She was 9 years old and already knew better than to push when her father's jaw got that tight. Instead, she pressed her forehead against the window and watched the rain blur the city into something that looked almost beautiful if you didn't have to live in it. Ethan took the next right, tires hissing through water deep enough to make him nervous. The truck was old, 15 years and 200,000 miles of refusing to die. But it wasn't invincible. One stall in this mess, and they'd be walking home in a storm that felt personal. He glanced at Sophie. Her hair was still damp from earlier, tied back in a ponytail that had started neat and given up halfway through the evening. Piano lessons ran late tonight, Mrs. Chen had kept her an extra 20 minutes working on some piece Ethan couldn't pronounce. Something about dynamics and phrasing that sounded like a foreign language. Sophie had stood at the upright piano in that cramped studio above the dry cleaner, fingers moving across keys worn smooth by 1,000 other students. And for those 20 minutes, she hadn't looked tired. She'd looked like she belonged somewhere. Ethan hated that he couldn't give her more of that. 3 years. 3 years since the funeral, since the hospital bills swallowed their savings, since he'd learned exactly how fast a life could fall apart when you stopped being 2 parents and became 1. He'd sold the house, moved them into a 2-bedroom apartment in a building where the heat worked most of the time and the neighbors didn't ask questions. Took the warehouse job because it paid weekly and didn't care that his resume had a 3-year gap where he'd been trying to keep his wife alive. Added handyman gigs on weekends, fixing toilets, patching drywall, replacing light fixtures for people who tipped in cash and didn't require a business license. It still wasn't enough. Sophie never complained, never asked why they didn't go on vacations or why her clothes came from the thrift store or why Ethan looked like he'd aged a decade in 3 years. She just practiced piano on the electronic keyboard he'd bought off Craigslist and did her homework at the kitchen table and told him she loved him every single night before bed, which somehow made it worse. The intersection ahead glowed red through the downpour. Ethan eased to a stop, watching water swirl past the truck's front tires. The street looked like a river. Trash bobbed along the curb. Somewhere nearby, a car alarm wailed and then cut off abruptly, drowned or dead. "Think we'll make it home before midnight?" Sophie's voice was small, careful. Ethan checked the dashboard clock. 9:47. "Yeah, kiddo, we'll make it." The light turned green. He pressed the gas, and that's when he saw her. A woman, standing alone in the middle of the intersection, like she'd been placed there by accident and forgotten. No umbrella, no coat. Just a soaked gray suit that probably cost more than Ethan made in a month, and heels that looked like they'd been designed by someone who'd never seen actual weather. She wasn't waving for help, wasn't holding a phone or looking around desperately. She was just standing there, completely still, staring at nothing. Behind her, a black Mercedes sat tilted at an angle with its hazards blinking weakly. Driver's door open, engine dead. Ethan's foot hovered over the gas pedal. Every practical bone in his body screamed to keep driving. It was late. Sophie was tired. The storm wasn't letting up. And the woman looked like the kind of person who had people to call. Assistants, drivers, lawyers, someone who got paid to handle disasters. But she wasn't calling anyone. She was just standing in the rain. "Dad?" Sophie leaned forward, squinting through the windshield. "Is she okay?" The light was still green. A car behind them honked, short, impatient. Ethan swore under his breath and pulled over. "Stay in the truck," he said, already reaching for the door handle. "Lock it. I'll be right back." "Dad." "Sophie, stay." He shoved the door open and stepped into the storm. The rain hit him like a fist, cold, violent, soaking through his jacket in seconds. Water filled his boots before he'd taken 3 steps. The woman didn't move as he approached, didn't even turn her head. Up close, she looked younger than he'd expected, maybe 30, with dark hair plastered against her face and eyes that should have been panicked, but just looked empty. "Hey!" Ethan had to shout over the rain. "You need help?" She blinked, like he'd interrupted something. Then her gaze focused on him, sharp, assessing, the kind of look that saw straight through people. "My car died." "No shit," Ethan wanted to say, but didn't. "You got someone to call." "Phone's dead." She said it flatly, like she was reading a grocery list. Heel broke. She lifted one foot slightly, showing him the snapped stiletto. "I was heading to the Grandview." "Right? The Grandview." Ethan knew the name, a 5-star hotel downtown that probably charged more per night than his monthly rent. He glanced back at his truck, at Sophie's face pressed against the passenger window, watching. This was stupid. This was the kind of thing that ended badly. Picking up strangers in storms, getting involved in someone else's disaster. He should tell her to wait by her car, call a tow truck once the rain let up, wish her luck. Instead, he heard himself say, "I can give you a ride." Something flickered in her expression, surprise, maybe, or suspicion. "You don't know me." "Yeah, I noticed." "I could be dangerous." Ethan almost laughed. She was half soaked, missing a heel, stranded in a storm. "Lady, I've got a 9-year-old in that truck and about $40 in my wallet. If you're dangerous, you're having a really off night." Her mouth twitched, not quite a smile, but close. Fair point. "So?" She looked at him for a long moment, rain streaming down her face. Then she nodded once. "Okay." Ethan led her back to the truck, opened the rear door, and climbed into the driver's seat, soaking wet. Sophie had unlocked the doors without being asked, already scooting forward to make room in the back. The woman slid into the rear seat carefully, like she wasn't sure how trucks worked. Water dripped from her clothes onto the floor mats that were already stained and cracked beyond saving. "Thank you," she said quietly. Ethan glanced at her in the rearview mirror. She'd pulled her hair back from her face, revealing sharp cheekbones and a jawline that belonged on magazine covers. Even drenched and exhausted, she looked like money. Old money. The kind that didn't apologize for taking up space. "Don't mention it," Ethan said, shifting into drive. "Grandview Hotel, right?" "Yes." Sophie twisted around in her seat, curiosity winning out over shyness. "Are you okay?" The woman met Sophie's eyes, and something in her expression softened just slightly. "I've had better nights." "Me too," Sophie said seriously. "I messed up my Chopin today. Mrs. Chen made me play it 6 times. Chopin's hard." "You know Chopin?" "A little." The woman leaned back against the seat, eyes closing briefly. "I used to play. Long time ago." Ethan pulled back onto the street, navigating around the flooded intersection. The Grandview was 20 minutes away if traffic cooperated, longer in this weather. He turned the heat up, trying to push warm air into the cab. The woman in the back seat didn't complain, didn't ask him to hurry, didn't pull out a phone to make calls. She just sat there, looking like someone who'd run out of fight. They drove in silence for a while. Sophie hummed quietly, some melody from her lesson. The rain kept hammering down. Ethan's hand stayed locked on the wheel, focused on keeping them moving through streets that wanted to swallow the truck whole. "What's your name?" Sophie asked suddenly. Ethan shot her a look. Sophie, it's okay. The woman opened her eyes. Vanessa. Vanessa Hale. I'm Sophie Cole. That's my dad, Ethan. Nice to meet you both. Well, Sophie grinned. Even though we're soaking wet? This time Vanessa did smile. Small, tired, but real. Especially because we're soaking wet. Ethan caught Vanessa's reflection in the rearview mirror again. She was watching Sophie with an expression he couldn't quite read. Not irritation, not impatience. Something else. Something that looked almost like longing. You staying at the Grandview? Sophie asked, still twisted around to face the back seat. For tonight, Vanessa said. I have meetings in the morning. What kind of meetings? Sophie, Ethan warned, let the lady rest. It's fine. Vanessa's voice was quiet. Business meetings. Very boring. My dad works really hard too, Sophie said proudly. He fixes things, buildings and houses and stuff. And he works at the warehouse, but he says that's temporary. Mas. Ethan's jaw tightened. He hadn't told Sophie the warehouse job was temporary. He'd said it was fine, that it paid the bills, that they were managing. Apparently she'd read between the lines better than he'd hoped. Sounds like your dad is very capable, Vanessa said, and there was something genuine in her tone that made Ethan's chest tighten. They turned onto the main boulevard leading downtown. The Grandview rose ahead of them, glass and steel and understated wealth lit up like a beacon against the storm. Ethan pulled into the circular drive, past valets in crisp uniforms, who looked mildly alarmed at the truck's appearance. Here we are, Ethan said. Vanessa reached for the door handle, then paused. Thank you. Really? No problem. She hesitated, hand on the door. Then she turned to Sophie. You know what? I'm starving, and I bet you two are too. Would you like to have dinner with me? My treat. Sophie's eyes went wide. Really? Sophie, we can't, Ethan started. Please, Vanessa said, and this time she was looking at him. I'd like the company, and it's the least I can do. Ethan wanted to say no. Wanted to take Sophie home, peel off his wet clothes, collapse into bed and not think about women in designer suits who probably thought charity came in the form of dinner invitations. But Sophie was looking at him with that hopeful expression he could never say no to, and Vanessa, despite everything, looked like someone who genuinely didn't want to be alone. Okay, he said finally, but we're not dressed for… Neither am I, Vanessa interrupted, gesturing at her soaked suit. Come on, they know me here. They followed her through the lobby. Ethan hyper-aware of the water dripping from his boots onto polished marble, Sophie clutching her piano folder like armor. Staff members nodded at Vanessa as she passed, not with the polite deference they'd give any guest, but with something deeper. Recognition, respect, maybe a little fear. The restaurant was half empty, muted lighting and white tablecloths and prices Ethan didn't want to look at. A hostess materialized immediately, her professional smile not wavering even at Vanessa's disheveled appearance. Miss Hale, your usual table? Please. They were led to a corner booth with leather seats and a view of the rain-soaked city. Sophie slid in first, eyes wide at the silverware. Ethan sat across from Vanessa, feeling distinctly out of place. Order anything you want, Vanessa said, handing them menus. Sophie opened hers carefully, scanning the options like she was decoding something precious. Ethan looked at the prices and felt his stomach drop. Steaks cost more than his electric bill. Vanessa, Ms. Hale, we really don't… Vanessa's fine. She was watching Sophie, not him. And yes, you do. You drove across the city in a storm to help a stranger. Let me buy you dinner. A waiter appeared. Sophie ordered chicken fingers with the kind of wonder that made Ethan's chest ache. He asked for a burger, cheapest thing that wouldn't look like charity. Vanessa ordered something French he couldn't pronounce. When the waiter left, silence settled over the table. Sophie swung her legs under the booth, humming again. Vanessa stared at her water glass like it held answers. You really play piano? Sophie asked, breaking the quiet. Vanessa nodded. Used to. My mother insisted. Is she a musician? She was a lot of things. Vanessa's voice went flat. She passed away 2 years ago. Oh. Sophie's face fell. My mom died too, 3 years ago. Ethan's hand tightened on his water glass. Sophie didn't talk about her mother often, not because she didn't remember, but because she'd learned it made adults uncomfortable, made them offer useless condolences and changed the subject. Vanessa didn't look uncomfortable. She looked at Sophie with something Ethan recognized because he saw it in the mirror every morning, grief that had learned to wear a mask. "I'm sorry," Vanessa said quietly. "Me too," Sophie said. "About your mom." They sat with that for a moment. Rain drummed against the windows. The restaurant hummed with quiet conversations and the gentle clink of silverware. "Do you miss playing piano?" Sophie asked. "Sometimes," Vanessa admitted, "but I don't have time anymore." "You should make time," Sophie said with the confident wisdom of someone who'd never paid bills. "My dad says the things you love don't wait around forever." Vanessa's eyes flicked to Ethan. "Your dad sounds smart." Ethan shifted uncomfortably. "I was talking about oil changes." Sophie giggled. Vanessa's mouth curved into something that might have been a real smile. Their food arrived, steaming plates that smelled better than anything Ethan had cooked in months. Sophie attacked her chicken fingers with enthusiasm. Ethan bit into his burger and tried not to think about how many groceries it cost. "So what do you do?" Ethan asked, figuring he should make conversation. "For work." Vanessa cut her food precisely. "I run a company." "What kind?" "Hospitality." Sophie looked up. "What's that mean?" "Hotels," Vanessa said. "I manage hotels." "Like this one?" "Yeah." Something flickered in Vanessa's expression. Amusement, maybe. "Yes, like this one." Ethan glanced around the restaurant with fresh eyes. The staff who'd recognized her. The hostess who'd called her by name. The way everyone moved around her like she was important. "You don't just manage it," he said slowly. "You own it." Vanessa met his eyes. "I own several." Sophie gasped. "You own hotels? That's so cool." Ethan felt like an idiot. He'd picked up a CEO in a rainstorm, invited her into his beat-up truck with cracked seats and a broken radio, fed her a line about $40 in his wallet, like that meant anything to someone who probably spent more on coffee. "Why didn't you say something?" he asked. "You didn't ask." Vanessa set down her fork. "And honestly, it was nice, being stuck in the rain, having someone help without knowing who I was." "We would have helped anyway," Sophie said immediately. "I know." Vanessa's voice went soft. "That's why I wanted dinner." They ate in companionable silence after that. Sophie chattered about piano lessons, about school, about the science project she was working on with baking soda volcanoes. Vanessa listened like Sophie was the most interesting person in the room. Ethan watched them both, trying to square the woman laughing at Sophie's jokes with the CEO, who probably made decisions worth millions before breakfast. "Can I ask you something?" Sophie said as their plates were cleared. "Sure." "Why were you standing in the rain like that? You looked really sad." Ethan opened his mouth to tell Sophie that was rude, but Vanessa cut him off. "I was," she said simply. "I just come from a meeting that didn't go well, and I was thinking about giving up." "On what?" "Everything." Vanessa looked at Sophie, then at Ethan. "But then your dad stopped. And you both reminded me that some people still do the right thing even when it's hard." Sophie beamed. "My dad always does the right thing." Ethan wanted to argue with that. Wanted to list all the times he'd failed, all the corners he'd cut, all the nights he'd fallen asleep wondering if he was ruining his daughter's life through sheer incompetence. But Vanessa was looking at him with an expression he couldn't read, and Sophie was smiling, and for once he just let it go. "Thank you," Vanessa said to both of them. "For tonight, I needed this." "Us too, Sophie said. "Right, Dad?" Ethan nodded. "Yeah, we did." They walked back through the lobby afterward, Sophie practically bouncing with excitement about telling her friends she'd had dinner at the Grandview. Vanessa walked them to the entrance, where rain still poured, but the valet had already pulled Ethan's truck around. "Before you go," Vanessa said, reaching into her purse. She pulled out a card, thick, expensive-looking, with gold lettering. "If you ever need anything, a better job, a reference, anything, call me." Ethan took the card, reading the embossed letters. Vanessa Hale, CEO, Hale Luxury Hospitality Group. "I'm serious," Vanessa said. "You've got skills. I could use someone like you." You don't know anything about me," Ethan said. "I know you stopped in a storm when everyone else kept driving." Vanessa smiled. tired, genuine. That's enough. Sophie hugged Vanessa before Ethan could stop her, quick and fierce. Thank you for dinner. Vanessa looked stunned for half a second, then carefully hugged her back. Thank you for the company. They drove home through rain that had finally started to ease. Sophie fell asleep against the window, head tilted at an angle that would make her neck sore. Ethan kept glancing at the card on his dashboard, white and gold in the dim light. He told himself he wouldn't call, told himself this was just a weird night, a random encounter, something to tell Sophie when she was older. Rich lady, rainstorm, free dinner, end of story. But when he pulled into their apartment complex and carried Sophie upstairs and tucked her into bed with her piano folder on the nightstand, he couldn't stop thinking about the way Vanessa had looked at his daughter. Like Sophie was something precious. Like maybe Vanessa understood what it meant to lose people and keep going anyway. Ethan stood in his kitchen, wet clothes still clinging to his skin, and stared at that business card for a long time. He had no idea that calling it would change everything. Ethan didn't call for 5 days. The card sat on his kitchen counter, collecting coffee rings and crumbs, mocking him every time he walked past. He told himself it was pride. Told himself he didn't need handouts from wealthy strangers who felt guilty about getting rescued in a rainstorm. Told himself he was doing fine. Warehouse shifts, weekend handyman jobs, bills paid on time if he skipped lunch most days. Then the truck's transmission started grinding. It happened on a Tuesday morning, pulling into the warehouse parking lot. A sound like metal chewing itself, followed by a shudder that traveled through the entire frame. Ethan sat there with the engine idling, hands gripping the wheel, doing math in his head that didn't add up no matter how he rearranged the numbers. Transmission rebuild, $1,200 minimum. Money he didn't have. Money that would wipe out what little cushion he'd managed to scrape together for Sophie's school supplies, and the dentist appointment she needed in 3 weeks. He could keep driving it, pray it lasted another month. Maybe 2 if he was careful about shifting and didn't push it too hard. But that was gambling with the only transportation he had, the only way to get Sophie to school and himself to work. That night, after Sophie went to bed, Ethan picked up the card. The number rang 4 times before someone answered. Not Vanessa, but an assistant with a voice like polished steel. Hale Hospitality Group, Ms. Hale's office. Ethan almost hung up. Yeah, my name's Ethan Cole. Vanessa, Ms. Hale, gave me her card and said to call if... One moment, please. Hold music. Something classical that probably cost more to license than Ethan made in a week. He paced his kitchen, phone pressed to his ear, wondering what the hell he was doing. Then Vanessa's voice, clear and direct. Ethan? Yeah, hi. Sorry to bother you. You're not bothering me. He heard something in the background, papers rustling. Is everything okay? Sophie, Hickey. Sophie's fine. He stopped, hating how this felt like begging. Look, you said you might have work. Real work. I'm good with repairs, building maintenance, that kind of thing. If you were serious, are you free tomorrow? Vanessa cut in. Tomorrow? I need someone to look at a property, the Westmont. Do you know it? Ethan knew it. Old hotel on the east side. 4 stories of faded brick and windows that caught the afternoon sun like dirty mirrors. He'd driven past it 100 times. Yeah, I know it. Meet me there at 9. I'll text you the address. Vanessa. Ms. Hale. It's just Vanessa, she said, and her voice softened slightly. And Ethan, I'm glad you called. The line went dead before he could respond. The Westmont looked worse up close. Ethan parked his protesting truck across the street and took in the building with a contractor's eye. Cracked window seals, gutters sagging with years of neglect, front steps that had settled unevenly into the foundation. A neon sign that probably said vacancy, when it worked just read Cancy in flickering pink letters. A black SUV pulled up behind him, sleek and quiet. Vanessa stepped out wearing a charcoal suit that made her look like she could fire someone just by glancing at them. Her hair was pulled back, makeup perfect, everything about her screaming competence and control. She looked nothing like the woman standing in the rain. Thanks for coming, she said, extending her hand. Ethan shook it, aware of his own worn jeans and work jacket with the sleeves starting to fray. What's the problem? Oh, geez, everything. Vanessa gestured at the building. I acquired this property 6 months ago. The maintenance contract cost me $40,000 a month, and somehow things keep breaking. Air conditioning died twice last summer, plumbing backs up every other week. Electrical issues that supposedly require rewiring the entire third floor. Ethan whistled low. $40,000 a month? According to the current contractor, it's all necessary. And you don't believe him? Vanessa's expression went cold. I believe he thinks I'm too busy to notice I'm being robbed. She led him inside through a lobby that smelled like mildew and broken promises. The front desk clerk nodded nervously at Vanessa and suddenly found something urgent to do in the back office. Ethan followed her up the stairs. The elevator had an out-of-order sign that looked permanent, taking in water stains on the ceiling, loose handrails, carpet worn through to the backing in high traffic areas. When was the last time anyone actually fixed something here, yes? He asked. That's what I'm paying you to tell me. They spent 3 hours going through the building. Ethan checked the mechanical room in the basement, looked at the roof access, tested faucets and outlets and HVAC units. Vanessa followed him, taking notes on her phone, asking questions that proved she'd done her homework even if she didn't know the technical details. The boiler room was where Ethan found the smoking gun. Look at this, he said, pointing to the water heater. This is a commercial unit, rated for maybe 15 years with proper maintenance. This model was discontinued in 2018. Someone's been billing you for emergency repairs on equipment that should have been replaced completely. Vanessa moved closer, studying the serial number plate. Can you prove that? Give me an hour and access to your maintenance invoices, Bob. She pulled out her phone, fired off a text. My assistant is sending them now. What else? Ethan showed her the HVAC system held together with duct tape and optimism. The electrical panel with breakers that had been bypassed instead of properly upgraded. The roof vents installed backwards so they were pulling moisture into the building instead of venting it out. This isn't maintenance, he said finally. This is someone milking you for as much as they can get away with while doing the bare minimum to keep the building operational. Vanessa's jaw was tight. Can you fix it? Most of it, yeah. Some things need replacement, not repair, but I can do it for a fraction of what you're paying now. Then you're hired. Ethan blinked. Just like that? Just like that. She looked at him directly, and he saw the same steel he'd heard in her assistant's voice. I need someone I can trust. Someone who will tell me the truth instead of what they think I want to hear. You've already proven you're that person. You barely know me. I know you stopped in a rainstorm, Vanessa said quietly. I know your daughter thinks you hung the moon. I know you're not here because it's easy. You're here because you need the work. That makes you honest. Ethan wanted to argue with her logic, wanted to point out that desperation and honesty weren't the same thing, but his truck was dying and Sophie needed new shoes, and he was so damn tired of barely surviving. What's the pay? He asked. She named a number that made his stomach flip. Salary, not hourly. Benefits. Equipment budget. More money than he'd made in the best year of his life. I can't accept that, he said automatically. Why not? Because it's... He struggled for words. It's too much. Vanessa's expression didn't change. Ethan, I'm not offering this because I feel sorry for you. I'm offering it because you're worth it. The previous contractor was stealing from me, and I didn't catch it because I trusted the wrong person. You caught it in 3 hours. That's worth every penny I'm offering, and then some. What if I screw up? Then you fix it. She held his gaze. I'm not looking for perfect. I'm looking for honest. Can you do that? Ethan thought about Sophie, about the dentist appointment and the school field trip she'd pretended not to care about because the permission slip had a fee attached. Thought about his truck grinding toward failure and the apartment with heat that worked most of the time. Thought about 3 years of treading water and never getting ahead. Yeah, he said. I can do that. Good. Start Monday. They shook hands again, and this time it felt like a contract. Vanessa walked him back to the lobby, already on her phone scheduling meetings, firing off instructions to people Ethan couldn't see. He watched her transform from the woman who'd shared dinner with his daughter into a CEO who ran an empire, and something about that transformation made him uneasy in ways he couldn't name. Ethan, she said as he reached the door, bring Sophie by sometime. I'd like to see her again. He didn't know what to say to that, so he just nodded and left. The weekend passed in a blur of telling Sophie about the new job and watching her face light up in ways that made his chest ache. She didn't understand what the money meant, not really, but she understood that her dad was happy, and that was enough. Monday morning, Ethan showed up at the Westmont at 7:30 with a toolbox and a thermos of coffee that tasted like ambition. The building looked different in daylight, less ominous, more like a problem he could actually solve. He spent the first week doing inventory, documenting every issue, building a repair schedule that would get the place functional without bankrupting anyone. Vanessa stopped by twice that week. The first time she walked through with an iPad, making notes while Ethan explained what needed immediate attention versus what could wait. She didn't question his judgment, didn't second-guess his recommendations, just listened, asked smart questions, and approved his budget on the spot. The second time, she brought coffee. "Thought you might need this," she said, handing him a cup from someplace downtown that charged $7 for espresso. Ethan took it, surprised. "Thanks." They stood in the lobby, morning light coming through dirty windows, the building quiet around them. Vanessa looked tired, the kind of tired that lived behind someone's eyes and never quite went away. "How's Sophie, Wa?" she asked. "Good. Talking about you non-stop. Apparently you're the coolest person she's ever met." Vanessa smiled, something genuine breaking through her professional mask. "She's a great kid. She thinks you own the world." "Just some hotels." Vanessa sipped her own coffee. "But they're eating me alive lately." Ethan heard something in her voice, not weakness, but exhaustion. The kind that came from fighting battles nobody else saw. "The Westmont isn't your only problem property? I have 6 hotels bleeding money right now, all of them with similar issues, contractors overbilling, staff not reporting problems, maintenance falling through the cracks. I'm trying to fix it all at once, and I'm drowning. Why not hire a facilities manager? Someone to oversee all of it?" Vanessa met his eyes. "I'm looking at him." Ethan nearly dropped his coffee. "I've been here a week, and you've already found $12,000 in fraudulent charges, prevented a pipe burst that would have cost me $50,000 in water damage, and gotten the staff to actually start telling you when things break. You're good at this, Ethan. Better than anyone I've had in the position." "I fix boilers," he said. "I'm not a corporate manager." "No, you're someone who solves problems. That's better." She set her coffee down on the front desk. "Look, I'm not asking for an answer today, but think about it. You'd oversee maintenance across all my properties. Real salary, real benefits, schedule that lets you be home for Sophie." Everything Ethan had learned about accepting charity, about being careful with opportunities that looked too good, screamed at him to say no. But the practical part, the part that had kept him and Sophie alive for 3 years, was doing math, stability, health insurance, a future that didn't depend on his truck making it another 6 months. "I'll think about it," he said. Vanessa nodded, picking up her coffee. "That's all I ask. Us." She left, and Ethan went back to replacing corroded pipe fittings, but his mind wasn't on the work. He kept thinking about the way Vanessa had looked when she talked about drowning, about fighting battles alone. It reminded him of the woman in the rainstorm, the one who'd looked like she was thinking about giving up. 2 weeks later, Ethan accepted the position. It changed everything overnight. Suddenly, he had an office, small, shared with the property manager at the Grandview, but his. Had a company phone that didn't drop calls. Had access to vendor accounts and maintenance records and a budget that made the work at the Westmont look like pocket change. And he had proximity to Vanessa. She worked out of the Grandview's executive floor, a space of glass walls and polished concrete that smelled like expensive coffee and quiet power. Ethan's office was 3 floors down, close enough that she'd stop by with questions about property assessments or to approve equipment purchases. Close enough that he started learning her patterns. How she took her coffee black after bad meetings, how she walked faster when she was thinking, how her professional mask slipped just slightly when Sophie's name came up in conversation. "How is she?" Vanessa asked one afternoon, appearing in his doorway between meetings. "Sophie, I mean." Ethan looked up from the spreadsheet he'd been fighting with for an hour. "She's good. Piano recital next month. She's nervous. She shouldn't be. She's talented. You heard her play once, in a car." Vanessa leaned against the door frame. Some things you just know. She paused, and something uncertain crossed her face. Would it be weird if I came? To the recital? Ethan's first instinct was to say yes. It would be weird, because how did you explain that the woman who owned half the hotels in the city wanted to watch a 9-year-old play Chopin? But then he thought about Sophie's face when she talked about Vanessa, about the way she'd asked 3 times if they were going to see the nice lady again. She'd like that, he said. Fair warning, though, it's in a high school gym. No fancy acoustics. I'll survive. But Vanessa didn't just show up to the recital. She arrived 15 minutes early with flowers, a small bouquet that Sophie clutched like treasure, and sat next to Ethan in folding chairs that squeaked every time someone shifted. Sophie played her piece perfectly, fingers moving across the keys with a confidence she hadn't shown during practice at home. And when she finished, Vanessa was the first person on her feet applauding. Afterwards, Sophie was incandescent. Did you see? I didn't mess up once. You were perfect, Vanessa said, and the warmth in her voice was so genuine that Ethan felt something shift in his chest. Can we get ice cream? Sophie asked, looking between them hopefully. Ethan started to say they should let Vanessa get back to her evening, but Vanessa answered first. I know a place. Best vanilla in the city. Aquí, what? They ended up at a small shop in a neighborhood Ethan had never been to. The kind of place where ice cream cost $12 a scoop and tasted like childhood memories made real. Sophie ordered something with chocolate and caramel. Ethan got coffee. Vanessa, inexplicably, got vanilla. You weren't kidding about the vanilla, Ethan said. Vanessa smiled. Some things don't need to be complicated. They sat at a small table by the window, watching traffic pass in the early evening light. Sophie chattered about school and friends and the science fair project she was definitely going to win. Vanessa listened with the same focused attention she gave quarterly reports, asking questions that proved she was actually hearing everything Sophie said. Ethan watched them, something warm and terrifying building in his chest. This wasn't the plan. The plan was to take the job, prove himself, build stability for Sophie. The plan wasn't to start looking forward to Vanessa's visits to his office. Wasn't to notice how she smiled differently around Sophie than she did around everyone else. Wasn't to start seeing her as anything other than his boss. But somewhere between the rainstorm and the recital and the vanilla ice cream, the plan had changed without asking his permission. Dad! Sophie's voice pulled him back. Vanessa asked you a question. He blinked. Sorry, what? I asked if you're free Saturday, Vanessa said. I need someone to look at the Harbor House property. It's been empty for 2 years, but I'm considering reopening it. I'd like your assessment. Yeah, I can do that. Bring Sophie. Vanessa added, glancing at his daughter. There's a park nearby. She can play while we work. Sophie bounced in her seat. Can we, Dad? Ethan looked at Vanessa, trying to read what was happening here, if this was just business or something else entirely. But her expression was carefully neutral, professional, giving nothing away. Sure, he said finally. Saturday works. The Harbor House was beautiful in the way abandoned things sometimes were. All potential and decay. Windows that looked out on water. Bones that remembered when they'd been something grand. Ethan walked through with Vanessa while Sophie explored the overgrown gardens with strict instructions to stay within sight. What do you think? Vanessa asked. Ethan ran his hand along a window frame that was mostly rot. Structurally, it's salvageable. Everything else needs work. Plumbing, electrical, HVAC, all of it's shot. You're looking at a full renovation. Cost? He did quick math in his head. $2 million. Maybe more depending on what we find when we open the walls. Vanessa nodded, staring out at the water. My mother used to bring me here before she got sick. We'd have tea in the dining room. She gestured toward a space that was now empty except for dead leaves and memories. She loved this place, said it had good bones. She was right. After she died, I couldn't make myself come back. Let it sit empty because dealing with it meant accepting she was really gone. Vanessa's voice was quiet, raw in a way Ethan had never heard. But now I think, I don't know, maybe bringing it back is better than letting it die too. Ethan understood that logic, understood trying to fix the broken things Because you couldn't fix the thing that actually mattered. It would be a good property. Location's perfect. Views are incredible. People would pay top dollar to stay here. Then let's do it. Vanessa turned to face him. I want you to manage the renovation. Vanessa, you're the only person I trust to do this right. And there it was again. That word. Trust. She kept giving it to him like a gift he hadn't earned, like she'd decided he was worthy, and that was the end of the discussion. Outside, Sophie shrieked with laughter at something, her voice carrying through broken windows. They both turned toward the sound automatically, watching her chase a butterfly through weeds that had once been manicured gardens. She's happy, Vanessa said softly. Yeah, she is. Because of you. Because you're a good father. Ethan shook his head. I'm just trying not to screw up too badly. That's what good fathers do. Vanessa looked at him, and something in her expression made his breath catch. My father was never that honest. Never admitted he was just figuring it out. He pretended he knew everything, controlled everything, and look where that got us. Where did it get you? Her smile was bitter. In court, Ethan had heard rumors, gossip among the staff about legal battles and family drama, but he'd ignored it. Figured it wasn't his business. But now, looking at the exhaustion etched into Vanessa's face, he realized this wasn't just work stress. This was something deeper, something that was eating her from the inside. You want to talk about it? He asked. Not particularly. She pulled out her phone, checking messages that had probably piled up in the 30 minutes she'd been away. But thank you for asking. They walked back through the building in silence, and Ethan made notes about load-bearing walls and foundation issues and tried not to think about how much he wanted to fix things that had nothing to do with construction. That night, after Sophie went to bed, Ethan did something he never did. He Googled Vanessa. The results were immediate and overwhelming. Articles about her taking over Hale Hospitality after her mother's death. Photos from charity galas where she smiled like cameras were weapons. And right at the top, recent news. CEO Vanessa Hale in legal battle with estranged father over company control. Ethan read the article twice. Her father, Richard Hale, had filed a lawsuit claiming Vanessa was unfit to run the company her mother had built. Claimed she was making reckless decisions, bleeding money on bad properties, letting emotions cloud her judgment. He wanted control transferred to a board of directors he'd appointed. Wanted his daughter removed from the company that bore their family name. The comment section was vicious. Half the people thought Vanessa was a spoiled rich kid playing CEO. The other half thought her father was a predator trying to steal his dead wife's legacy. Nobody seemed to consider that maybe both things were true, that family could be complicated and painful and still worth fighting for. Ethan closed the laptop and sat in his dark kitchen, thinking about the woman in the rainstorm who'd looked like giving up, about the CEO who'd hired him on instinct and kept trusting him with bigger responsibilities, about the person who brought flowers to a kid's piano recital and ordered vanilla ice cream and looked at Sophie like she was seeing something precious she'd never thought she could have. His phone buzzed. A text from Vanessa. Thank you for today, for Harbor House, for bringing Sophie. It means more than you know. He stared at the message for a long time before typing back. Anytime. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Then, I'm going to hold you to that. Ethan set the phone down and tried not to think about how much trouble he was in. How the smart thing would be to keep this professional, to not let whatever was building between them become something that could hurt them both. But smart had never been his strong suit, and when Vanessa texted the next week asking if he and Sophie wanted to have dinner, not at a fancy restaurant, but at her penthouse apartment because she'd attempted to cook and needed honest opinions, Ethan said yes without hesitation. The penthouse was everything he'd expected and nothing like he'd imagined. Expensive, yes, floor-to-ceiling windows and furniture that looked like art, but also messy in human ways. Books stacked on the coffee table, a blanket draped over the couch like someone actually sat there, a piano in the corner that had sheet music open on the stand. Sophie beelined for the piano. You really play? Occasionally, Vanessa said, when I can't sleep. Can I try? Go ahead. While Sophie explored the keys, Ethan followed Vanessa into the kitchen where something was definitely burning. How bad is it? He asked. The smoke alarm went off twice. Vanessa opened the oven, revealing what might have once been chicken. I can negotiate multi-million-dollar contracts, but apparently roasting poultry defeats me. Ethan couldn't help it. He laughed. Real laughter that felt rusty from disuse. When's the last time you actually cooked? Does reheating count? No. Then never. Vanessa looked at the charred disaster with something like betrayal. I had a recipe. I followed the instructions. Did you preheat the oven? Yes. To the right temperature? Vanessa paused. There are different temperatures? Ethan took over, salvaging what he could and improvising with ingredients she had in a refrigerator that was mostly empty. Vanessa watched him work with the same focused attention she gave everything, asking questions about timing and seasoning like he was teaching her something genuinely important. Where'd you learn to cook? She asked. My wife. The words came out before he could stop them. He never talked about Rachel, never brought her up in casual conversation because it made people uncomfortable, made them offer sympathy he didn't want. But something about Vanessa's kitchen, maybe the normalcy of it, the way she was watching him like he was a person instead of an employee, made it easier. She was incredible, could make anything taste good. After she got sick, I had to figure it out myself. Sophie couldn't live on frozen dinners forever. I'm sorry, Vanessa said quietly. About your wife. It was 3 years ago. That doesn't make it hurt less. Ethan looked at her, really looked, and saw his own grief reflected back. Different circumstances, different loss, but the same weight. Your mom. How long ago? 2 years, cancer, fast and brutal. Vanessa leaned against the counter. She built this company from nothing, started with one hotel and turned it into an empire. My father was never around. He had his own businesses, his own life. Mom did it alone. And when she got sick, suddenly he was interested again. Wanted control of everything she'd built. She made me promise I wouldn't let him take it. That why he's suing you? Vanessa's expression hardened. He thinks I'm weak. Thinks I'll fold if he pushes hard enough. He's wrong. I believe you. Do you? She met his eyes. Because everyone else thinks I'm losing. The board, the investors, half my staff. They think I should settle, give him partial control, compromise. But this isn't about money or business. It's about keeping the promise I made to my mother. And I can't break that, even if it costs me everything. Saints. Ethan understood that kind of loyalty. Understood making promises to people who weren't there anymore and killing yourself to keep them. What does he want? Everything. Control of the board, executive authority. He wants to gut what Mom built and turn it into something unrecognizable. All profit, no soul. She pushed away from the counter, wrapping her arms around herself. And he'll use anything he can find to make his case. Every mistake I've made, every property that's struggling, every decision that didn't work out perfectly. From the living room, Sophie played something simple but sweet on the piano. The notes drifted into the kitchen like a reminder that beauty still existed somewhere. For what it's worth, Ethan said. I don't think you're weak. Vanessa smiled, tired but genuine. Thanks. That's worth more than you know. They ate dinner at her dining table with Sophie between them, and it felt strange and right in equal measure. Like playing house. Like trying on a future that didn't quite fit yet but might with time. Sophie talked nonstop, asking Vanessa questions about hotels and travel and whether she'd ever met anyone famous. Vanessa answered each question seriously, never talking down to her, treating Sophie's curiosity like it mattered. After dinner, Sophie fell asleep on Vanessa's couch, despite insisting she wasn't tired. Ethan found a blanket and tucked it around her, then joined Vanessa by the windows looking out over the city. Lights stretched to the horizon, millions of lives playing out in parallel. Thank you, Vanessa said quietly, for coming tonight, for fixing dinner, for not making this weird. Is it weird? Probably. She glanced at him. I don't usually have employees over. Don't usually let people see me fail at basic life skills. You didn't fail. You just need practice. Is that your professional opinion? That's my honest opinion. Ethan hesitated, then added, and for the record, I don't think of you as my boss when we do this. No. Her voice was soft. What do you think of me as? He should have deflected, should have made a joke, changed the subject, kept the boundaries clear. But standing there in her apartment with Sophie asleep on the couch and the city glowing outside, Ethan was tired of being careful. "A friend," he said. "Maybe more, if that's okay." Vanessa looked at him for a long moment, something vulnerable breaking through her usual control. "Yeah," she said finally. "That's okay." They stood there in comfortable silence, watching the city breathe, and Ethan tried not to think about all the ways this could go wrong. About power dynamics and legal battles and the fact that his entire livelihood depended on the woman standing next to him. About what would happen if whatever was building between them collapsed under the weight of reality. But for tonight, with Sophie sleeping peacefully and Vanessa smiling beside him, Ethan let himself believe that maybe some risks were worth taking, that maybe choosing to stop in the rainstorm had been the beginning of something neither of them expected, and that sometimes the best decisions were the ones that terrified you most. The shift happened slowly, then all at once. What started as dinners became weekend trips to museums where Sophie dragged them through exhibits while asking questions neither adult could answer. Became Vanessa showing up at Sophie's school play with the front row seat she'd apparently reserved weeks in advance. Became Ethan finding excuses to stop by Vanessa's office with property reports that could have been emailed just to see her smile when he walked through the door. Nobody at work said anything directly, but Ethan felt the shift in how people looked at him. Conversations that stopped when he entered rooms. Knowing glances between staff members. The property manager at the Grandview who started calling him boss, with an edge of something that wasn't quite respect. "They think I'm sleeping my way to the top," Ethan told Vanessa one night, sprawled on her couch after Sophie had gone down in the guest room that had somehow become Sophie's room without anyone officially deciding it. "The staff, they think that's why you gave me the Harbor House project." Vanessa looked up from her laptop, still working at 9 p.m. because she never really stopped. "Are you? Am I what?" "Sleeping your way to the top." Ethan's face went hot. We're not." "I know." Vanessa closed the laptop, something unreadable in her expression. "But would you, if I asked?" The question hung between them like a dare. They'd been dancing around this for weeks. Hands that touched too long when passing coffee, conversations that went deeper than friendship, the way Vanessa looked at him sometimes like she was trying to solve an equation that didn't have an answer. But neither of them had been brave enough or stupid enough to actually name what was happening. "Is that what you want?" Ethan asked carefully. "I don't know what I want." Vanessa stood, pacing to the windows. "I want my company. I want to beat my father in court. I want Sophie to keep looking at me like I'm not completely broken. I want—" She stopped, shoulders tight. "I want to stop feeling like I'm drowning every second of every day." Ethan went to her, stopping a careful distance away. Close enough to matter, but far enough to let her choose. "You're not drowning. You don't know that." "Yes, I do, because drowning people don't fight like you're fighting. They don't show up for kids' piano recitals and attempt to cook dinner and refuse to let their fathers steal what their mothers built." He paused. "Drowning people give up. You're doing the opposite." Vanessa turned and her eyes were bright with something that might have been tears if she let herself cry. "What if it's not enough? What if I lose anyway?" Then you lose, but you don't lose because you quit. Is that supposed to be inspiring? No, Ethan said honestly. It's supposed to be true. She laughed, sharp and broken, and closed the distance between them. Kissed him hard like she was trying to prove something, or forget something, or maybe just feel something that wasn't fear. Ethan kissed her back, hands finding her waist, and for a few heartbeats there was nothing but this. No lawsuits, no judgment, no complicated future. Just two people who'd been alone too long finally choosing not to be. When they broke apart, Vanessa's expression was wrecked. "This is a terrible idea." "Probably. You work for me. I'm aware. And I'm in the middle of a legal battle that could destroy everything I've built." "Also aware." Vanessa pressed her forehead against his. "So why does this feel like the first good decision I've made in years?" "Because maybe it is," Ethan said quietly. They stood there breathing the same air, and Ethan tried to memorize this moment before reality crashed back in. Before the morning when they'd have to figure out what this meant at work, how to navigate the mess they were stepping into willingly with eyes wide open. But that was future Ethan's problem. Tonight, he just held her and pretended the world outside this apartment didn't exist. The morning came anyway, brutal and unforgiving. Ethan woke on Vanessa's couch with her curled against him, both of them still dressed, Sophie still asleep in the guest room. Sunlight cut through the windows like accusation. His phone buzzed with messages from the Westmont's property manager about a burst pipe on the second floor. Reality, right on schedule. "I should go," he murmured. Vanessa's eyes opened, sharp and awake, instantly. "Yeah." Neither of them moved. "This is going to be complicated," she said. "I know. People will talk. Let them." Vanessa sat up, running fingers through hair that was tangled in ways that made Ethan's chest tight. "I can't lose you over this. Can't lose Sophie. If we do this, if we're actually doing this, and it goes wrong, then we'll deal with it," Ethan interrupted. "Together." "You're very optimistic for someone who barely survived the last 3 years." "I'm not optimistic," Ethan said. "I'm just tired of being alone." Something in Vanessa's face softened. "Yeah, me too." They told Sophie over breakfast, Vanessa attempting pancakes while Ethan supervised and Sophie provided commentary on the structural integrity of each one. When Vanessa finally said they were seeing each other, Sophie looked between them with the kind of knowing expression 9-year-olds shouldn't have. "Like dating?" Sophie asked. "Yes," Vanessa said, "like dating. Are you going to get married?" Ethan choked on his coffee. "Sophie!" "What? You like her. She likes you. That's what people do." "It's a little more complicated than that," Vanessa said, but she was smiling. "Why?" Neither adult had a good answer for that. They managed 2 weeks of relative peace. 2 weeks where Ethan worked on the Harbor House renovation, and Vanessa fought her legal battles, and they pretended the two worlds weren't on a collision course. 2 weeks of stolen dinners and Sophie's homework spread across Vanessa's dining table and falling asleep on couches because neither of them wanted to go home to empty apartments. Then Vanessa's father found out. Ethan was at Harbor House when Vanessa called, voice tight with panic. "You need to come to my office. Now." "What happened?" "Just come." He made it to the Grand View in 15 minutes, took the elevator to the executive floor with dread sitting heavy in his stomach. Vanessa's assistant waved him through without comment, face carefully blank. Vanessa was standing behind her desk, rigid with fury, holding papers that looked legal and devastating. "My father's lawyers just filed an emergency motion. They're claiming I'm emotionally compromised and unfit to run the company." "Because of us?" "Because of you specifically." She handed him the documents. "They've got photos. Us at Sophie's recital, having dinner, you leaving my apartment at 6 a.m., and they're spinning it like you're some opportunist who seduced your way into a position of power." Ethan read the words, each one landing like a punch. Phrases like inappropriate relationship with subordinate and compromised judgment and gold-digging maintenance worker jumped out, calculated to destroy both their reputations. "They're going to use this in court," Vanessa said, voice brittle. "Going to paint me as someone who can't separate personal feelings from business decisions. Who gave you the Harbor House project because we're sleeping together, not because you earned it? But that's not—" "It doesn't matter what's true." Vanessa's control finally cracked. "It matters what they can make a judge believe. And right now, they're making me look like an idiot who let a man manipulate his way into my company through my daughter." Ethan's blood went cold. "Through Sophie?" "They have testimony from the Westmont staff about how Sophie came by the property, how I started showing up more after meeting her. They're implying I pursued the relationship because of her, not you." The accusation was so vile, Ethan couldn't breathe around it. "That's insane. That's strategy." Vanessa pressed her hands flat on the desk like she needed the solid surface to stay upright. "And it's working. My lawyers say this motion has teeth, that the judge might actually question my fitness to lead if we can't prove the relationship doesn't affect my business judgment. So we prove it." "How?" Vanessa's laugh was jagged. "How do I prove that hiring you was about competence when I gave you a job after knowing you for 3 hours? How do I prove Harbor House went to you on merit when I didn't interview a single other candidate? How do I prove any of this when the truth is I did let my feelings for you and Sophie influence my decisions?" Ethan felt the trap closing. saw the impossible choice taking shape. What are you saying? Vanessa wouldn't look at him. My lawyers think I should ask for your resignation, that removing you from the company eliminates the conflict of interest and proves I'm prioritizing business over personal relationships. The words hit like a physical blow. You want me to quit, but No. Her voice broke. I want my father to stop destroying everything I touch. I want to keep the company my mother built. I want you and Sophie in my life without it costing me everything else. But I can't have all of that. So you choose the company. It's not that simple. It is exactly that simple. Ethan dropped the papers on her desk. You're asking me to walk away from the first stable job I've had in 3 years. From a salary that finally lets me give Sophie a real life. You're asking me to destroy my future so you can win a legal battle against a man who doesn't deserve to win. Ethan. And the hell of it is, I get it. His hands were shaking. I understand why you have to choose the company. It's your mother's legacy, your promise to her. I understand that. Then why do you look like I just shot you? Because it felt like she had. Because for 2 weeks he'd let himself believe they were building something real, something worth fighting for. And now she was proving that when the pressure hit, he was expendable. What about Sophie? He asked quietly. Vanessa's face crumpled. I won't lose her. But you'll lose me. That's not fair. None of this is fair. Ethan's voice rose despite himself. None of this is fair to Sophie, who's finally happy again, or to you, who's fighting for something that matters, or to me for believing I could have stability for once in my life. But that's the reality, and you're asking me to be the one who sacrifices. I'm asking you to help me survive this by destroying myself in the process. They stared at each other across her desk, two people who'd found each other in a rainstorm and were now drowning anyway. Ethan could see the moment Vanessa's mask slammed back into place, the CEO overriding the person who'd kissed him on her couch and looked at his daughter like she was something precious. If you resign, I'll give you 3 months severance, Vanessa said, voice flat, and a recommendation letter that will get you work anywhere in the city. Keep your money. Ethan, I said keep it. He turned toward the door, needing to get out before he said something unforgivable. I'll have my resignation on your desk by end of day. Don't do this, Vanessa said, and her voice cracked. Please. We can figure something else out. No, we can't. Ethan looked back at her, memorizing how she looked right now, powerful and broken, and choosing her mother's legacy over everything else. You made your choice. Now I'm making mine. He left before she could respond, walked past her assistant who definitely heard everything, took the elevator down past his office where he'd stupidly started keeping spare clothes and photos of Sophie, made it to his truck before the anger gave way to something worse. He'd known better. Had known from the beginning that getting involved with Vanessa was stepping into a world he didn't belong in, with rules he didn't understand and consequences he couldn't afford. But he'd done it anyway because Sophie was happy, and Vanessa looked at him like he mattered. And for 2 weeks he'd felt like maybe they were building a future. Now he had nothing but a job he'd have to quit, and a daughter he'd have to explain this to and anger at himself for being stupid enough to believe. His phone rang. Vanessa. He declined it. It rang again. Declined again. A text came through. Please don't make me lose both of you. Ethan threw his phone on the passenger seat and drove. Sophie knew something was wrong the second he picked her up from school. She didn't ask immediately, just watched him with those 2 perceptive eyes while he navigated traffic in silence. It wasn't until they got home that she cornered him in the kitchen. Did you and Vanessa break up? Ethan was pulling leftovers from the fridge, not hungry but needing something to do with his hands. What makes you think that? You look like you did after Mom died. The observation was so accurate it stole his breath. It's complicated, kiddo. Did she do something bad? No, she just... How did you explain this to a 9-year-old? She has to fight for something important, and me being around makes that fight harder. Sophie processed that with her usual seriousness. So you're leaving the job? Yeah. That's stupid. Sophie. It is. You were happy. We were happy. And now you're giving up because her dad is mean? Sophie's voice rose, unusual heat bleeding through. That's not fair. Life's not fair, Ethan said, hating how that sounded. So you just quit? That's what you're teaching me? That when things get hard, you walk away? The accusation landed hard because it was exactly what he was doing, walking away instead of fighting, choosing the path of least resistance because he was tired and scared and didn't know how to fight battles in courtrooms with lawyers who charged more per hour than he made in a week. I'm trying to do the right thing, he said. No, Sophie said, and tears were starting now, angry and hurt. You're trying to do the easy thing. The right thing would be helping Vanessa fight. It's not that simple. Yes, it is, Sophie's voice cracked. She needs us, and you're leaving because you're scared. The words hit like a slap because they were true. He was scared of losing another job, of dragging Sophie through instability again, of fighting a battle he didn't know how to win. But more than that, he was scared of the way Vanessa had looked at him when she'd asked him to resign. Like he was a problem to be solved, not a person she loved, if she even loved him. Maybe that had all been in his head. Go to your room, he said quietly. Dad, now Sophie. She went, but not before giving him a look that said she was disappointed in ways that would haunt him later. Her door slammed. Ethan stood in the kitchen surrounded by their small life and tried to figure out how everything had gone so wrong so fast. His phone buzzed again, not Vanessa this time, but an unknown number. He almost didn't answer, then thought maybe it was about work, a contractor, a property emergency. Hello? Mr. Cole, this is James Brennan. I represent Richard Hale. Ethan's stomach dropped. How did you get this number? I make it my business to know things about people who matter, and right now you matter quite a bit to my client's case. Brennan's voice was smooth, calculated. I'm calling as a courtesy, to give you an opportunity to tell your side of the story. I don't have a side. Of course you do. You're the working-class single father who got swept up in Vanessa Hale's world, who took a job offer because you needed money and found yourself in a relationship with your boss that you probably didn't fully understand. That's sympathetic. A judge would listen to that. I'm not testifying against Vanessa. I'm not asking you to, Brennan said. I'm simply saying that if you were called as a witness, your testimony about how Ms. Hale conducted business would be valuable. How she made hiring decisions. Whether she allowed personal feelings to influence professional judgment. Whether she seemed emotionally stable. She's the most competent person I've ever worked for. And yet she's asking you to resign because your relationship makes her look bad. That's not the behavior of a stable leader, Mr. Cole. That's desperation. Ethan's grip on the phone tightened. What do you want? Nothing. Just wanted to introduce myself before we meet in court. Because we will meet, one way or another. My client is determined to protect his late wife's company from his daughter's poor judgment. And you, unfortunately, are evidence of that poor judgment. Brennan paused. Think about Sophie. Think about whether you want her dragged into a public legal battle. There are easier ways to resolve this. Don't you dare bring my daughter into this. I'm not bringing her anywhere. You did that when you started dating your boss. The lawyer's voice went cold. Resign quietly, sign an NDA, and this all goes away. Fight us, and I promise you'll regret it. The line went dead. Ethan stood there shaking with rage and fear. They were threatening Sophie. Not directly, not in words that could be proven, but the message was clear. Cooperate, or they'd make his daughter part of their case, twist her into evidence of Vanessa's instability. He called Vanessa back. She answered immediately. Ethan, your father's lawyer just called me. Threatened to drag Sophie into court if I don't cooperate. Versin. Silence. Then, what did he say exactly? Ethan repeated the conversation, listening to Vanessa's breathing get tighter with each word. When he finished, the silence stretched so long he thought she'd hung up. I'll destroy him, she finally said, voice like ice over rage. I'll burn everything down before I let them touch Sophie. How? How do you fight this? I don't know yet, but I'll figure it out. She paused. Don't resign. Not yet. Give me 48 hours. Vanessa, please, trust me one more time. Ethan wanted to say no, wanted to pack up Sophie and run somewhere her name wouldn't end up in court documents, somewhere they could go back to being invisible and safe. But Sophie's voice echoed in his head. You're trying to do the easy thing, and he realized she was right. The easy thing was running. The right thing was fighting. 48 hours, he said. Then I'm done. He hung up and went to Sophie's room, knocked on the door that was plastered with school art projects and piano competition certificates. She opened it, eyes red from crying. I'm sorry, Ethan said. You were right. I was being scared instead of being smart. Sophie looked up at him. Are you going to help her now? I'm going to try. Good. She hugged him tight. Because she needs you. And I think you need her too. Ethan held his daughter and tried to believe that sometimes doing the right thing was enough. That sometimes fighting impossible battles was worth it, even when you didn't know how to win. That maybe the woman who'd stood in the rainstorm waiting for someone to stop was worth fighting for, even when everyone said to keep driving. The next 48 hours would prove whether that belief was courage or just another kind of stupidity. But right now, holding Sophie in their small apartment, Ethan chose to believe it was courage, and he prayed that would be enough. Vanessa called an emergency meeting the next morning in a conference room that smelled like old coffee and desperation. Ethan arrived to find her lawyers already there, 3 of them in suits that cost more than his monthly rent, shuffling papers with the kind of practiced efficiency that came from billing by the minute. Vanessa stood at the head of the table looking like she hadn't slept, hair pulled back severe enough to hurt, eyes that could cut steel. Thank you for coming, she said to Ethan, formal and careful. Like they were strangers instead of people who'd fallen asleep on her couch 2 nights ago. He nodded, taking a seat as far from the lawyers as possible. Everything about this room felt like enemy territory. We need to talk about the emergency motion, one of the lawyers said. Sandra Chen, senior partner, voice like broken glass wrapped in silk. Mr. Hale's team is arguing that your relationship with Mr. Cole demonstrates impaired judgment and emotional instability. They have photos, testimony from staff, documentation of rapid promotions, and unusual project assignments. Ethan earned those positions, Vanessa said flatly. We know that, but proving it in court is different than knowing it. Sandra pulled out a tablet, swiping through documents. They're painting a narrative. Vulnerable CEO. Grieving her mother makes impulsive decisions. Hires unqualified maintenance worker after one meeting. Gives him increasingly important roles. Begins personal relationship that clouds professional judgment. It's compelling because parts of it are true. The parts they're leaving out are also true, Ethan said. Like the fact that I exposed $12,000 in fraudulent maintenance charges in my first week, or that the Harbor House assessment saved Vanessa from investing in a property with foundation issues the previous inspector missed. Sandra looked at him with something approaching respect. Do you have documentation of that? All of it. Reports, invoices, comparative analyses. Ethan leaned forward. Every decision Vanessa made about my employment is backed up by results. That's not emotional instability. That's good business. Then that's what we present. Sandra made notes. We need to flip the narrative, show that Ms. Hale's instincts about Mr. Cole were correct, that her judgment was sound, that the relationship developed after professional respect was established. Will that be enough? Vanessa asked. Honestly, I don't know. Sandra set down the tablet. Your father's team is smart. They know a romantic relationship with a subordinate creates optics problems regardless of merit. And they're using those optics to question your fitness to lead. So what do we do? The room went quiet. Ethan watched the lawyers exchange glances, that silent communication that came from years of working together. Finally, Sandra spoke. We fight back. Hard. We document everything Mr. Cole has accomplished. We bring in staff testimony about his competence and integrity. We show the judge that your personal life hasn't compromised your professional responsibilities. And if that's not enough? Vanessa's voice was steady, but Ethan heard the fear underneath. Then we consider a settlement. Give your father partial board control in exchange for dropping the competency challenge. No. Vanessa's response was immediate. That's exactly what he wants. Partial control becomes full control within a year. I've seen him do it to other companies. Then we go to trial and we win. Sandra stood. But I need both of you to understand something. This will get ugly. They'll dig into every aspect of your relationship. Every dinner, every night, mister. Cole spent at your apartment, every interaction with his daughter. They'll question motives and intentions and make both of you defend feelings that shouldn't require defense. Ethan felt his stomach turn. Sophie doesn't testify. We'll do everything possible to prevent that, Sandra said. But if they subpoena her... No. Ethan's voice was hard. That's the line. You keep her out of this, or I walk right now. Sandra looked at Vanessa, who nodded once. We keep Sophie out of it, whatever it takes. The lawyers left to prepare documents, leaving Ethan and Vanessa alone in the conference room. The silence stretched, heavy with everything they weren't saying. Finally, Vanessa moved to the window, staring out at the city like it held answers. I'm sorry, she said quietly, for asking you to resign, for putting you in this position, for all of it. Are you sorry we happened? Ethan asked, because that's different than being sorry about the consequences. Vanessa turned, and her expression was raw in ways he rarely saw. No, I'm not sorry we happened. I'm just sorry it's costing you so much. It's costing both of us. Not equally. She crossed her arms, defensive. You could walk away right now. Take another job. Move on. I'm the one who has to stay and fight. Is that what you think? Ethan stood, anger rising. That I can just forget you exist? Forget Sophie asking about you every day? Forget that for 2 weeks I actually felt like I was building something that mattered? I don't know what I think anymore. Vanessa's voice cracked. I just know that everyone I care about gets hurt because of me. My mother spent her life building something my father's trying to destroy. You took a job that's turning into a nightmare, Sophie. She stopped, swallowing hard. Sophie deserves better than being dragged into my mess. Sophie deserves the truth, Ethan said. That sometimes life is complicated and messy, and you fight anyway because the alternative is worse. And what if we lose? What if I lose the company, and you lose your job, and Sophie loses... Vanessa couldn't finish the sentence. Ethan closed the distance between them, careful not to touch because if he touched her now, he'd fall apart. Then we lose. But we lose fighting. That has to count for something. Does it? Her eyes were bright with unshed tears. Because right now, it feels like fighting just means more people get hurt. Then stop fighting alone. Ethan's voice softened. That's what you've been doing wrong. You're so used to handling everything yourself that you forgot how to let people help. I don't know how to do that. Neither did I, until I met someone stubborn enough to keep helping even when I told her not to. He smiled slightly. Someone who brought flowers to a kid's piano recital and attempted to cook chicken and looked at my daughter like she was the most important person in the room. Vanessa's mouth curved despite the tears now falling. That chicken was terrible. It was inedible. I followed the recipe. You followed it wrong. She laughed, broken and wet, and Ethan finally did touch her, hands gentle on her shoulders, grounding them both. We're going to figure this out. Together. Not because it's easy or simple or guaranteed to work, but because it's worth fighting for. You're worth fighting for, Vanessa said quietly. So are you. They stood there breathing the same air, and Ethan tried to believe his own words, tried to ignore the voice in his head that sounded like his late wife telling him to be careful, to protect Sophie first, to not confuse wanting something with it being the right choice. But Rachel was gone, and Vanessa was here. And maybe it was time to stop living like the past was the only thing that mattered. His phone buzzed, a text from the Westmont property manager. Staff meeting requested. Everyone's asking questions about your status. I should go, Ethan said. Deal with the rumor mill before it gets worse. Vanessa nodded, stepping back and rebuilding her professional mask piece by piece. Keep me updated? Always. Us. The staff meeting was exactly as uncomfortable as Ethan expected. 20 employees crammed into the Westmont small conference room, all pretending they weren't gossiping about him, all with questions they were too professional to ask directly. He stood at the front and tried to project confidence he didn't feel. I know there are rumors, he said, about me and Miss Hale, about my position, about whether I'm qualified or just lucky. So let me be clear. Yes, Ms. Hale and I are involved personally. Yes, that's complicated given our professional relationship. No, that hasn't affected my work or her business decisions. That's not what people are saying, someone muttered from the back. Ethan focused on the voice. Marcus, one of the maintenance techs who'd been there longer than Ethan had been alive. What are people saying, Marcus? Marcus shifted uncomfortably. That you got promoted because you're dating the boss. That the rest of us don't have a shot at advancement because we're not sleeping our way up. The accusation hung there, ugly and familiar. Ethan could have gotten defensive, could have pulled rank and shut it down. Instead, he pulled out his phone and opened his project files. First week I was here, I identified fraudulent billing that was costing this property $12,000 a month. Second week, I restructured the maintenance schedule to prevent equipment failures instead of just reacting to them. Third week, I renegotiated vendor contracts that saved 15% across the board. He looked up. Harbor House assignment came after I caught foundation issues that would have cost Ms. Hale $2 million in repairs. I didn't sleep my way into anything. I worked my way here. But you are dating her, another voice said. Jennifer, front desk supervisor. Yeah, I am. Ethan didn't flinch. And I'm not apologizing for that. But my personal life doesn't change the fact that this building runs better now than it has in 5 years. You all know that. You've seen the improvements. Silence. Then Marcus spoke again, gruff but honest. Place does run better. Equipment actually works. We're not constantly putting out fires. Because someone finally cared enough to fix things right instead of cheap, Ethan said. That's what Ms. Hale hired me to do. That's what I'm going to keep doing regardless of what her father's lawyers say in court. You're going to court? Jennifer asked, concerned now. Ms. Hale is. I'm just collateral damage. Ethan tried to smile. But I'm not going anywhere unless she fires me. So if you've got problems with equipment or scheduling or anything else work-related, come to me. If you've got problems with my personal life, that's not your business. He dismissed the meeting before anyone could push back, before the carefully constructed confidence could crack. Most of the staff filtered out quickly, back to their shifts. But Marcus lingered, arms crossed, studying Ethan with decades of bullshit detection. You really love her? Marcus asked when they were alone. The question caught Ethan off guard. Yeah, I think I do. Then you better fight like hell, Marcus said. Because people like her father don't play fair, and they sure as hell don't care who gets hurt. Speaking from experience, watched my daughter go through a custody battle with her ex, rich guy with expensive lawyers who twisted everything until she looked unfit. She lost her kids for 2 years. Marcus's jaw was tight. Don't let that happen here. Whatever it takes, you fight. Ethan nodded, throat tight. I will. That night, he got home to find Sophie doing homework at the kitchen table, humming something that sounded like Chopin. She looked up when he walked in, pencil poised over math problems. How was the meeting? Awkward, but we survived. Ethan dropped his keys on the counter. How was school? Emily asked if you and Vanessa are getting married. Ethan froze. What did you say? Oh. I said I don't know, but I hope so because Vanessa's cool and you're less grumpy when she's around. Sophie went back to her math. Also, Mrs. Chen wants to know if Vanessa is coming to the spring concert. I don't know if that's a good idea right now. Sophie looked up, suddenly serious. Because of the court stuff? How do you know about that? I Googled her. At Ethan's expression, Sophie shrugged. What? You told me to research things I'm curious about. I was curious. Ethan sat down across from her, tired in ways that had nothing to do with work. What did you find? That her dad is suing her. That people think you're using her for money. That she might lose her company. Sophie's voice was matter-of-fact, but her eyes were worried. Are we going to be okay? Yeah, kiddo, we'll be okay. But will Vanessa? Yeah, kiddo, will... The question was so direct, so clear about what really mattered, that Ethan had to take a moment. I'm trying to help make sure she is. Good. Sophie returned to her math. Because I like her, and she needs people who don't want anything from her except for her to be happy. Ethan watched his daughter, 9 years old and wiser than most adults, and wondered when she'd grown up enough to see through complicated situations with perfect clarity. When did you get so smart? I've always been smart. You just don't notice because you're busy being stressed. Sophie paused. Can I ask you something? Always. If you marry Vanessa, does that mean we get to live in the fancy apartment? Ethan couldn't help laughing. That's your main concern? There's a piano, a real one, and the building has a pool. Mom. Sophie grinned. But mostly I just want you to be happy again, like you were before Mom died. The statement landed like a punch wrapped in love. Ethan hadn't realized Sophie remembered him being happy, had assumed she'd been too young to notice how grief had changed him, but of course she'd noticed. Kids noticed everything. I want that too, he said quietly. His phone rang. Vanessa. He answered immediately. Hey, can you come over? Her voice was strained. I just need you here. Be there in 20. He arranged for Sophie to stay with their neighbor, then drove across the city with a feeling of dread building in his chest. Something had happened. Something bad enough that Vanessa was asking for help instead of handling it alone. She opened the door looking wrecked, makeup gone, hair loose, still wearing the suit from this morning, but rumpled like she'd been pacing for hours. Behind her, the penthouse was dark, except for the lights from the city. What happened? Ethan asked. My father called. Vanessa's voice was flat. He wanted to make a deal, said if I give him majority board control and step down as CEO, he'll drop the competency challenge and leave you alone. That's what he wanted all along. I know. She walked to the windows, arms wrapped around herself. And the smart thing would be to take it, keep the company in the family even if I'm not running it. Protect you and Sophie from getting dragged through court, except that I'm not strong enough to win this fight. You are strong enough, Ethan said. Am I? She turned, and her eyes were hollow. Because right now, I feel like I'm drowning again. Like that night in the rainstorm when I was standing there thinking about giving up. And the only difference is, now I have more people who will get hurt when I go under. Ethan crossed to her, taking her shoulders firmly. Look at me. When she did, he continued, You are not drowning. You are fighting. And you're not alone anymore. I'm here. Sophie's here. Your staff is behind you. Your mother built something strong enough to survive your father's greed. And you're strong enough to protect it. What if I'm not? Then we find out together. He pulled her close, feeling her shake against him. But we don't give up before the fight even starts. Vanessa clung to him like he was the only solid thing in a tilting world. They stood there while the city glowed outside. Two people who'd found each other by accident and were now choosing each other on purpose, despite everything that made it complicated. I love you, Vanessa said quietly, muffled against his shoulder. I know that's probably stupid and terrible timing, and we've only known each other a few months, but I love you, both of you, and I'm terrified of losing you. Ethan's chest went tight. You're not losing us. You can't promise that. No, he admitted, but I can promise I'm not going anywhere by choice. Whatever happens in court, whatever your father throws at us, I'm staying. We're staying. She pulled back enough to look at him, searching his face for doubt. Why? Bachi. Because Sophie asked me when I got so grumpy, Ethan said. And because I realized I haven't been this not grumpy since before Rachel died. Because you make me want to build a future instead of just surviving day to day. Because, he stopped, swallowing hard. Because I love you too. And that's terrifying, but also the first thing that's felt right in 3 years. Vanessa kissed him then, desperate and sure, like she was trying to memorize this moment before reality could steal it. Ethan kissed her back and tried not to think about courtrooms and lawyers and the ways this could all fall apart. They spent that night talking about strategy and fear and what they'd do if the worst happened. Vanessa showed him the company financials, the properties her mother had built from nothing, the empire that represented decades of work and sacrifice. Ethan showed her the folder he'd started keeping of Sophie's artwork and school projects, the physical evidence of a life he was trying to give his daughter despite limited resources. She's incredible, Vanessa said, looking at a drawing Sophie had done of the three of them, stick figures holding hands in front of a building that might have been the Grand View. "She likes you," Ethan said. "Keeps asking when you're coming over again." "What do you tell her?" "That you're busy fighting dragons." Vanessa smiled slightly. "That's more accurate than you know." Oh. They fell asleep on her couch again, tangled together in a way that would make Ethan's neck hurt in the morning but felt necessary right now. When he woke a few hours later to early dawn light, Vanessa was already awake, watching him with an expression he couldn't read. "What?" he asked, voice rough from sleep. "I was just thinking," she said quietly, "that if I lose everything else, at least I had this. These few months of not being alone, of having someone who sees me as more than a CEO or a disappointment or a weapon in a legal battle." "You're not going to lose everything. But if I do, then we rebuild," Ethan interrupted. "Together. You think I'm with you because of the penthouse and the company?" I fell for the woman standing in the rain who looked like she'd forgotten how to ask for help. "Everything else is just details." Vanessa's eyes filled with tears. "I don't know how to do this. How to let someone care without it feeling like weakness." "Practice," Ethan said simply. "Start by accepting that needing people doesn't make you weak. It makes you human." The next 2 days passed in a blur of preparation. Ethan documented everything: project reports, cost analyses, staff testimonials about his work quality and professionalism. Vanessa's lawyers built a case around competence and results, turning the narrative from CEO makes emotional decisions to CEO makes strategic hires that save money and improve operations. What? The staff at every property Ethan had worked on wrote letters of support. Marcus wrote 3 pages about how Ethan had fixed problems that had been ignored for years. Jennifer detailed how his management style improved morale. Even vendors wrote testimonials about his fair negotiation and professional conduct. "This is good," Sandra Chen said, reviewing the materials. "Really good, but we need to be prepared for them to attack the relationship directly. They'll ask about dates, overnight visits, when feelings developed. We need answers that are honest but don't give them ammunition." "How do we do that?" Vanessa asked. "By being clear that personal feelings developed after professional respect was established. That Mr. Cole earned his positions before the relationship began. That your decision-making has been sound throughout." They rehearsed answers until Ethan could recite them in his sleep. Dates, timelines, project milestones. The goal was to show a progression of professional competence that justified every promotion, with the relationship as a natural development between two people who respected each other, not a manipulation or loss of judgment. But the night before the hearing, Ethan couldn't sleep. He lay in his own bed. He'd gone home to be with Sophie, and stared at the ceiling, running through worst-case scenarios. What if the judge sided with Vanessa's father? What if Ethan's testimony made things worse instead of better? What if Sophie had to watch her father lose another thing that mattered? His phone buzzed. A text from Vanessa. "Are you awake?" "Yeah. Can't shut my brain off." 3 dots, then, "Me neither. Keep thinking about everything that could go wrong." Ethan called instead of texting. She answered immediately. "Hey," he said. "Hey." Her voice was small. "I'm scared." "Me too." "What if—" "Don't," Ethan interrupted gently. "Don't spiral. We've done everything we can. The rest is up to the judge." "Well, I hate that," Vanessa said. "Hate that my entire future depends on convincing one person that I'm competent, that my mother's legacy could be destroyed by a man who never cared about it until there was money involved." "Your mother built something strong enough to survive this," Ethan said, "because she built it through you, not your father, you." Silence. Then, "Thank you." "For what?" "For stopping in the rain, for taking a chance on us, for not running when things got complicated." Her voice caught. "For fighting." "Always," Ethan said. "Now try to sleep. Tomorrow we show them what we're made of." Together or together. He hung up and lay there listening to Sophie breathe in the next room, steady and sure. His daughter who believed in fighting for people you loved. His daughter who'd asked if Vanessa was coming to the spring concert because she'd already decided Vanessa was part of their family. Ethan closed his eyes and tried to believe that would be enough. That love and truth and documentation would overcome manipulation and legal maneuvering, that sometimes the good guys actually won. But belief wasn't certainty, and morning was coming whether he was ready or not. The courtroom was smaller than Ethan expected, more administrative than dramatic, with fluorescent lights that turned everyone slightly gray. He sat in the gallery behind Vanessa and her legal team, watching Richard Hale hold court on the opposite side like a man who'd already won. Silver-haired, expensive suit, the kind of confidence that came from decades of getting exactly what he wanted. Ethan had seen men like him before, contractors who bid low and delivered garbage, landlords who ignored broken heat in winter, bosses who shorted paychecks and dared you to complain, men who believed the world owed them everything and gave nothing back. The judge, a woman in her 60s named Patricia Moreno, called the hearing to order. Ethan's hands were sweating. He'd left Sophie with Marcus's daughter for the day, telling her he'd be back by dinner, trying to project certainty he didn't feel. Richard Hale's lawyer went first, smooth and practiced, laying out their case like he was reading from a script. Vanessa Hale was grieving, unstable, making reckless decisions based on emotion rather than business sense. The evidence? A rapid-fire series of questionable hires, the most egregious being one Ethan Cole, unqualified maintenance worker promoted to facilities director within weeks, given authority over multi-million-dollar renovations, all while conducting an inappropriate relationship with his employer. Ms. Hale's judgment has been compromised, Brennan said, gesturing to a presentation that showed photos of Ethan and Vanessa at Sophie's recital, having dinner, leaving her apartment building. She has allowed personal entanglement to cloud professional responsibility. Her late mother built Hale Hospitality through careful planning and sound judgment. Her daughter is dismantling it through impulse and emotion. Son. Ethan watched Vanessa's spine go rigid, her hands flat on the table. But she didn't react, didn't give them the emotional outburst they were clearly hoping for. Sandra Chen stood for their defense, and her voice cut through the courtroom like a knife through silk. Your Honor, what Mr. Brennan calls questionable hires, we call strategic business decisions backed by documented results. Mr. Cole didn't manipulate his way into Hale Hospitality. He proved his value immediately and repeatedly. We have testimony from staff across 6 properties, cost analyses showing significant savings, and project reports demonstrating competence that far exceeds his job description. She presented the documentation methodically, Marcus's letter about the Westmont improvements, Jennifer's account of better morale and operational efficiency, vendor testimonials about fair negotiations. Then the numbers. 12,000 monthly and fraudulent charges exposed, equipment failures reduced by 60%, vendor costs down 15% across the board, Harbor House Foundation issues that would have cost $2 million if missed. These are not the actions of an emotionally compromised CEO, Sandra said. These are the actions of a leader who recognizes talent regardless of where it comes from. Ms. Hale saw potential in Mr. Cole and was proven correct. That's good business, not poor judgment. Brennan stood for rebuttal. And the relationship, the late-night visits, the CEO dating her own employee, the relationship developed after Mr. Cole had already proven his professional value, Sandra responded. And Ms. Hale has maintained clear boundaries. Mr. Cole reports to property managers, not directly to her. His promotions were based on merit and results, not personal favoritism. Then let's ask Mr. Cole directly. Brennan turned to the judge. Your Honor, we'd like to call Ethan Cole to testify about the nature of his relationship with Ms. Hale and the circumstances of his employment. Et al? War apart. Judge Moreno nodded. Mr. Cole, please approach. Ethan stood, legs unsteady, and walked to the witness stand. The bailiff swore him in. He put his hand on the Bible and promised to tell the truth. And then he was sitting there with everyone staring at him, Richard Hale with calculation, Vanessa with barely concealed fear, the judge with neutral assessment. Brennan approached like a shark sensing blood. Mr. Cole, how long have you known Miss Hale? About 4 months. And in those 4 months, you went from maintenance worker to facilities director? Yes. That's quite a rapid rise. What qualified you for such responsibility? Ethan met his eyes. Results. I fixed problems that had been bleeding money for years, exposed fraud, prevented equipment failures, saved the company hundreds of thousands of dollars. Or Ms. Hale promoted you because you were dating. No, she promoted me because I earned it. Brennan smiled thinly. Let's talk about how you met. You picked Ms. Hale up in a rainstorm, correct? Yes. Stranded, vulnerable, you saw an opportunity? I saw someone who needed help. And 3 days later, she offered you a job. Convenient. She offered me a chance to prove myself, Ethan corrected, which I did. Brennan paced, hands behind his back. When did the relationship become romantic? About 6 weeks after I started working. 6 weeks. And who initiated it? Ethan hesitated, knowing this was a trap. It was mutual. But you work for her. That creates a power dynamic, doesn't it? Makes you vulnerable to her influence? Or makes her vulnerable to accusations like this, Ethan shot back. I'm here because I'm good at my job, not because of who I'm dating. You have a daughter, correct? 9 years old? Ethan's blood went cold. Leave her out of this. I'm simply establishing context. You're a single father, struggling financially, raising a child alone. Then you meet a wealthy CEO who offers you a high-paying job and stop. Ethan's voice was hard. You want to imply I used my daughter to manipulate Vanessa? That I put Sophie in front of a CEO like bait? That's sick. And it's wrong. Brennan raised an eyebrow. I'm suggesting that Ms. Hale's attachment to your daughter influenced her professional decisions. Vanessa cares about Sophie because Sophie's a good kid, not because it gets her anything. And Sophie loves Vanessa because Vanessa treats her like she matters, not like a tool or a weapon or evidence in a court case. Ethan leaned forward. You want the truth? Here it is. I was drowning before I met Vanessa, working 2 jobs, barely keeping the lights on, wondering if I was ruining my daughter's life through sheer incompetence. Vanessa gave me a shot when no one else would, not because she felt sorry for me, not because she wanted something, because she saw I could do the work, and I proved her right. The courtroom was silent. Brennan's expression flickered, not quite uncertainty, but close. No further questions. Sandra stood for redirect. Mr. Cole, in your professional opinion, is Ms. Hale competent to run Hale Hospitality? Absolutely. Has your relationship affected her business judgment? No. She's held me to the same standards as everyone else. Higher, actually, because she knows people are watching. Would you have accepted the position if you thought it was charity? Ethan looked at Vanessa, who was watching him with tears she was fighting to control. No, I've lived on charity. This wasn't that. This was an opportunity to prove I'm more than circumstances made me look. Sandra nodded. Thank you. No further questions. Ethan stepped down, legs shaking, and returned to his seat. Vanessa didn't turn around, but he saw her shoulders relax slightly. Richard Hale took the stand next, polished and practiced, testifying about his late wife's vision and his concern for the company's future. About Vanessa's grief clouding her judgment, about reckless spending and emotional decisions. He made it sound almost reasonable, almost like he actually cared. But Sandra tore into him on cross-examination. Mr. Hale, you filed this suit 6 months after your wife's death. Why wait? I was grieving, Richard said smoothly. Or you were waiting to see if your daughter would fail on her own. Sandra pulled out documents. You approached 3 board members about replacing Vanessa as CEO before you filed this motion. You tried to gather votes for a no-confidence measure. Richard's expression tightened. I was concerned. You were positioning yourself to take control. Sandra presented emails, meeting notes, proof of Richard's maneuvering. This isn't about protecting your wife's legacy. It's about taking something you never built and never cared about until it became profitable. That's not, you haven't attended a board meeting in 5 years, haven't visited a property, haven't shown any interest in operations until you filed this suit. Isn't that true? Richard's lawyer objected, but the damage was done. The judge had seen the documentation, the timeline of Richard's sudden involvement. It looked exactly like what it was, a power grab. Vanessa testified last, and Ethan watched her transform into the CEO who'd built 6 hotels into profitable operations while grieving her mother. She was clear, direct, Unemotional about facts while being honest about feelings. Did your relationship with Mr. Cole influence your decision to promote him? Brennan asked. No, his work influenced that decision. The relationship developed separately, after he'd already proven his value. You don't see a conflict of interest? I see a competent employee who happens to also be someone I care about. Those aren't mutually exclusive. Vanessa looked at her father. My mother taught me to recognize talent and nurture it. That's what I did with Ethan. The fact that I also fell in love with him doesn't erase his qualifications or accomplishments. Love, Brennan repeated. You're in love with your employee. Yes. And you think that's appropriate? Yes. I think it's honest, Vanessa said. I could lie about it, pretend it's just professional, keep everything separate and neat. But my mother also taught me that denying reality doesn't change it. Ethan and I are together. That's real. His competence is also real. Both things can be true. Brennan tried to push further, but Vanessa didn't crack. She answered every question with the same calm directness, refusing to be baited into emotional responses that would support their narrative. Finally, Judge Moreno called for closing arguments. Sandra went first, summarizing the evidence of Ethan's competence. Vanessa's sound judgment, Richard's opportunistic timing. Brennan countered with concerns about appearance of impropriety, about the risks of emotional decision-making in corporate leadership. Then Judge Moreno called a recess to review the materials. They waited in a conference room down the hall, Vanessa pacing while her lawyers reviewed notes, and Ethan sat in a chair that was too small for his frame, wondering if he'd just destroyed everything by admitting he loved her in open court. You okay? Vanessa asked quietly, stopping her pacing to stand beside him. No idea. You did good up there. Really good. Did I, or did I just hand them ammunition? You told the truth. Vanessa's hand found his. That's all we could do. An hour later, they were called back. Judge Moreno had papers in front of her, reading glasses perched on her nose, expression unreadable. I've reviewed the testimony and documentation, she said. This case comes down to a question of competence and judgment. Mr. Hale argues his daughter is unfit to lead due to emotional instability and poor decision-making. The evidence doesn't support that conclusion. Ethan felt Vanessa's hand tighten in his. Ms. Hale's hiring of Mr. Cole was unconventional, but demonstrably successful. The documentation shows significant cost savings, improved operations, and professional conduct from both parties. While the romantic relationship creates optics issues, it doesn't constitute evidence of impaired judgment. Judge Moreno looked at Richard Hale. What I see here is the father attempting to use his daughter's personal life as justification for a corporate takeover. That's not grounds for removing a competent CEO, so Richard's face went dark. However, Judge Moreno continued, and Ethan's stomach dropped. The appearance of conflict of interest cannot be ignored entirely. Ms. Hale, moving forward, Mr. Cole cannot report to you in any capacity, directly or indirectly. He needs clear separation in the chain of command. We can arrange that, Sandra said quickly. See that you do. Judge Moreno turned to Richard. As for your petition for emergency control, it's denied. Ms. Hale retains full authority as CEO. This matter is dismissed. The gavel came down. For a moment, nobody moved. Then Vanessa made a sound that was half laugh, half sob, and turned to hug her lawyers. Richard Hale stood abruptly and left without a word, Brennan trailing behind, both of them rigid with barely controlled fury. Ethan sat there, feeling like the floor had dropped out from under him, and he was still somehow standing. They won. Outside the courthouse, Vanessa stopped on the steps, breathing in cold air like she'd been underwater. Her lawyers dispersed with promises to follow up on paperwork. Richard's car pulled away, tinted windows hiding whatever rage was happening inside. We won, Vanessa said, like she was testing the words. You won, Ethan corrected. We. She looked at him. I couldn't have done that alone. Sure you could have. No. Vanessa shook her head. I would have settled, would have given him partial control to avoid the fight. You made me believe I could win. Ethan pulled her close, right there on the courthouse steps with people walking past. You always could. You just forgot for a while. They stood there while the city moved around them, Two people who'd found each other by accident and chosen each other on purpose, despite every reason not to. Eventually, they'd have to deal with the aftermath, the gossip, the restructuring, the fact that their relationship was now public record. But right now, in this moment, they just held each other and breathed. Ethan's phone rang. Sophie. He answered immediately. "Hey, kiddo. Did you win?" Her voice was breathless with hope. "Yeah, we won." Sophie shrieked so loud he had to pull the phone away from his ear. In the background, Marcus's daughter laughed. "Can I talk to Vanessa?" Ethan handed over the phone. Vanessa's expression softened as Sophie chattered about something, probably plans for celebration or questions about when she could come over, or a dozen other things that 9-year-olds considered urgent. "I miss you too," Vanessa said into the phone. "Yes, we can have dinner tonight, whatever you want. Even ice cream for breakfast if your dad says it's okay." She glanced at Ethan, who shook his head firmly. "He says no to ice cream for breakfast, but maybe ice cream for dinner? Well, they made plans while Ethan watched, something settling in his chest that had been unsettled for 3 years. This thing they were building, messy, complicated, born from a rainstorm and sustained through legal battles, felt more real than anything had in a long time. That night they had dinner at Vanessa's apartment. All three of them, pizza because Sophie requested it, and Vanessa didn't trust herself with actual cooking yet. Sophie talked nonstop about everything they'd missed while Ethan was in court, gesturing wildly with pizza slices and somehow getting sauce on her shirt despite Ethan's warnings. "So what happens now?" Sophie asked eventually. "With work and stuff? What?" "I'll still have my job," Ethan said. "Just won't report to Vanessa directly anymore. Different chain of command." "What's chain of command?" "Means Dad's boss isn't me," Vanessa explained. "He'll work for someone else at the company, so there's no conflict." Sophie processed that seriously. "But you're still dating." "Yeah," Ethan said. "We're still dating." "And I can still come over?" "Always, dear," Vanessa said. "Good." Sophie took another bite of pizza. "Because I like it here. The piano's better than mine." After dinner, Sophie played that piano while Ethan and Vanessa cleaned up the kitchen in comfortable silence. Chopin drifted through the apartment, simple but beautiful, and Ethan thought about all the moments that had led here. The rainstorm, the job offer, the dinners and piano recitals and late nights working through property reports, the fear and the fighting and the choice to keep going anyway. "Thank you," Vanessa said quietly, handing him a plate to dry. "For what?" "For stopping. That night. For everything after." Ethan set down the plate and turned to face her. "You keep thanking me like I did you a favor, but you gave us a future, me and Sophie. We were drowning and you pulled us out. You pulled yourself out. I just gave you a chance, which is more than anyone else did." He touched her face, gentle. "I spent 3 years believing I'd used up my luck, that the best I could hope for was survival. Then I met you and realized maybe there was more." "Is there?" Vanessa's voice was uncertain in ways she rarely let show. "More, I mean. After everything, the court case, the publicity, the complications, is this actually sustainable?" Ethan thought about that honestly, about the logistics of dating his indirect employer, about the gossip that would never fully go away, about the fact that their worlds were still fundamentally different in ways that mattered. "I don't know," he admitted, "but I want to find out." "Yeah?" "Yeah." He kissed her softly. "We've already survived the hard part. Everything else is just details." Sophie's plane stopped. "Are you guys being gross?" she called from the living room. "Little bit," Ethan called back. "Can I have ice cream now?" Vanessa laughed. "Yes, you can have ice cream. Hey." They joined Sophie in the living room, 3 people who'd become a family in the span of 4 months, eating ice cream and arguing about movies, and existing in the comfortable chaos of ordinary life. Later, Sophie fell asleep on the couch again, and Ethan carried her to the guest room that had fully become Sophie's room at some point, decorated with her drawings, stocked with spare clothes and books, and the stuffed rabbit she'd had since she was 3. "She's home here?" Vanessa said, standing in the doorway. "Yeah, she is." "Are you?" Ethan looked around the penthouse that had stopped feeling like foreign territory and started feeling like a place he belonged. Getting there. Oh! Over the next few weeks, they figured out the logistics. Ethan's new reporting structure put him under the VP of operations, a no-nonsense woman named Patricia, who made it clear she didn't care who he was dating as long as the work got done. The Harbor House renovation moved forward on schedule. Staff gossip gradually shifted from scandal to acceptance, helped by the fact that Ethan kept proving he'd earned his position. Richard Hale made one last attempt at corporate warfare, trying to call a board vote on Vanessa's leadership. But the board, which had seen the court documents and Ethan's results, and Vanessa's steady leadership through crisis, voted unanimously to keep her as CEO. Richard resigned from the board entirely after that, taking a settlement that gave him enough money to disappear but no power over the company. "He's really gone?" Sophie asked when Vanessa told them over dinner one night. "Really gone," Vanessa confirmed. "Good. He seemed mean." "He was mean," Vanessa said. "But he's not our problem anymore." Sophie considered that while twirling spaghetti. "Does that mean we can relax now?" Ethan and Vanessa looked at each other, something passing between them that didn't need words. The fight was over. The immediate crisis had passed. They could actually try to build something without constantly looking over their shoulders. "Yeah," Ethan said. "I think we can relax now." By Christmas, they'd settled into a rhythm that felt sustainable. Ethan kept his apartment because Sophie needed stability and moving too fast felt dangerous, but they spent most nights at Vanessa's place. Sophie had friends in both neighborhoods, homework spread across both kitchen tables, clothes in both closets. It was messy and imperfect and required constant negotiation about schedules and expectations, but it worked. The Harbor House reopened in early December, fully renovated, booked solid through New Year's. Ethan stood in the lobby on opening night, looking at the building his work had brought back to life, and felt something he hadn't felt in 3 years. Pride. Not the desperate pride of survival, but the quiet pride of building something good, of taking broken things and making them whole, of proving that unconventional paths could lead somewhere worth going. "You did good," Vanessa said, appearing beside him with 2 glasses of champagne. "We did good," Ethan corrected, taking a glass. They toasted the building, the company, the future that was still uncertain but felt possible now. Around them, guests mingled and music played and life continued in all its messy complexity. Sophie found them near the windows overlooking the water. "Mrs. Chen says I'm ready for the advanced program," she announced. "But it costs money." Ethan's stomach tightened automatically, that old reflex of calculating costs and coming up short. But before he could speak, Vanessa was already pulling out her phone. "How much?" she asked. "Vanessa, you don't have to," Ethan started. "I know I don't have to. I want to." She looked at him. "Unless you'd rather I didn't." "Well," and that was the thing about this relationship Ethan was learning. Accepting help didn't mean weakness. Letting people care didn't mean losing independence. Sometimes love looked like someone else paying for piano lessons so your daughter could grow into her potential. Sometimes it looked like trusting that the help came without strings or judgment or expectations of repayment. "Okay," he said. "Thank you." Vanessa smiled and turned back to Sophie. "Send me the information. We'll make sure you can take those lessons." Sophie hugged her fiercely. "You're the best." "So are you, kid." Later, after Sophie had gone to bed in her room, the one in Vanessa's apartment that now had a proper bed frame and a desk and posters of pianists and astronomers, Ethan and Vanessa stood on her balcony looking at the city. "Do you think about it?" Vanessa asked. "That night in the rain? How different things would be if you'd kept driving?" "Sometimes," Ethan admitted. "But mostly I think about how glad I am that I stopped. Even with everything that came after, the court case, the complications, all of it, especially because of all that." He turned to face her. "Before you, I was just surviving. Going through motions, trying to keep Sophie safe, not thinking about anything beyond the next paycheck. You made me want more than survival, want a future that wasn't just about getting through each day." "I didn't do that," Vanessa said. "You did. We did it together." Ethan pulled her close. "That's the point. Neither of us could have done this alone. But together, we figured it out." They stood there while the city glowed below, 2 people who'd been drowning separately and learned to swim together. It wasn't a fairy tale. There were still bills to pay and work stress and moments when their different worlds created friction. Sophie still had hard days when she missed her mother. Vanessa still had board meetings where people questioned her decisions. Ethan still worried about money more than Vanessa understood and probably always would. But they had each other. Had Sophie playing piano in the next room and dinner reservations for tomorrow and plans for New Year's that involved all three of them watching fireworks from this balcony. Had a future that looked different than either of them had imagined, but better than what they'd had before. "I love you," Vanessa said quietly. "I love you too. Think we can do this? Long term?" Well, Ethan thought about that honestly. About all the ways this could still go wrong. About the practical challenges of blending families and navigating professional boundaries and building something that lasted. "I think we can try. And keep trying. That's all anyone does, really." That's very practical. "Someone has to be," Ethan said, smiling. "You're the romantic who believes in grand gestures. And you're the guy who fixes broken things." "Yeah, I am." He kissed her gently. "Lucky for both of us, we were broken in ways that fit together." Inside, Sophie called out that she couldn't sleep and could they please come tell her goodnight again. They went, leaving the balcony and the philosophical conversation, returning to the ordinary work of being a family. Sophie wanted water, then another blanket, then to ask 3 questions about space travel before she'd settle down. "You're stalling," Ethan said. "I'm curious," Sophie protested. "You're tired and trying to stay awake." Eventually, she did sleep, curled around her stuffed rabbit, hair spread across the pillow. Ethan and Vanessa stood in the doorway watching her breathe, that careful watch parents do to convince themselves their children are safe. "Thank you, Vanessa said, "for sharing her with me. She's not mine to share. She's her own person." Ethan smiled slightly. "But I'm glad she chose you too." They went to bed themselves, tangled together in ways that were familiar now, comfortable. Sleep came easier than it had in 3 years. And when Ethan woke in the early morning to weak winter sunlight, Vanessa still asleep beside him, and Sophie's humming drifting from the kitchen where she was probably attempting to make breakfast unsupervised, he felt something he'd thought was gone forever. Hope. Not the desperate hope of survival, but the quiet hope of people who'd found each other against odds and chose each other every day after. The hope of broken things healing, of second chances working out, of rainstorms leading somewhere dry and warm. He'd stopped in the rain one night because it was the right thing to do. And that single choice, that moment of seeing someone who needed help and choosing not to look away, had led to everything after, to a job that gave him dignity, to a woman who saw him as more than his circumstances, to a daughter who got to dream bigger than survival. Sometimes the smallest decisions changed everything. Sometimes choosing kindness when it was inconvenient led to futures you couldn't imagine. Sometimes drowning people found each other and learned to swim. Ethan got out of bed and went to the kitchen where Sophie was indeed attempting breakfast, eggs and toast in various states of completion. He helped her finish, and when Vanessa emerged sleepy and disheveled, they ate together while snow started falling outside, soft and quiet. This was the future he'd stopped for, this messy, imperfect, beautiful, ordinary life with people he loved and who loved him back. And it was enough, more than enough. It was everything. The courtroom was smaller than Ethan expected, more administrative than dramatic, with fluorescent lights that turned everyone slightly gray. He sat in the gallery behind Vanessa and her legal team, watching Richard Hale hold court on the opposite side like a man who'd already won. Silver-haired, expensive suit, the kind of confidence that came from decades of getting exactly what he wanted. Ethan had seen men like him before, contractors who bid low and delivered garbage, landlords who ignored broken heat in winter, bosses who shorted paychecks and dared you to complain. Men who believed the world owed them everything and gave nothing back. The judge, a woman in her 60s named Patricia Moreno, called the hearing to order. Ethan's hands were sweating. He'd left Sophie with Marcus's daughter for the day, telling her he'd be back by dinner, trying to project certainty he didn't feel. Richard Hale's lawyer went first, smooth and practiced, laying out their case like he was reading from a script. Vanessa Hale was grieving, unstable, making reckless decisions based on emotion rather than business sense. The evidence? A rapid-fire series of questionable hires, the most egregious being one Ethan Cole, unqualified maintenance worker promoted to facilities director within weeks, given authority over multi-million-dollar renovations, all while conducting an inappropriate relationship with his employer. Ms. Hale's judgment has been compromised, Brennan said, gesturing to a presentation that showed photos of Ethan and Vanessa at Sophie's recital, having dinner, leaving her apartment building. She has allowed personal entanglement to cloud professional responsibility. Her late mother built Hale hospitality through careful planning and sound judgment. Her daughter is dismantling it through impulse and emotion. Ethan watched Vanessa's spine go rigid, her hands flat on the table. But she didn't react, didn't give them the emotional outburst they were clearly hoping for. Sandra Chen stood for their defense, and her voice cut through the courtroom like a knife through silk. Your Honor, what Mr. Brennan calls questionable hires, we call strategic business decisions backed by documented results. Mr. Cole didn't manipulate his way into Hale hospitality. He proved his value immediately and repeatedly. We have testimony from staff across 6 properties, cost analyses showing significant savings, and project reports demonstrating competence that far exceeds his job description. She presented the documentation methodically. Marcus's letter about the Westmont improvements, Jennifer's account of better morale and operational efficiency, vendor testimonials about fair negotiations. Then the numbers. 12,000 monthly and fraudulent charges exposed, equipment failures reduced by 60%, vendor costs down 15% across the board, Harbor House Foundation issues that would have cost $2 million if missed. These are not the actions of an emotionally compromised CEO, Sandra said. These are the actions of a leader who recognizes talent regardless of where it comes from. Ms. Hale saw potential in Mr. Cole and was proven correct. That's good business, not poor judgment. Brennan stood for rebuttal. And the relationship, the late-night visits, the CEO dating her own employee? The relationship developed after Mr. Cole had already proven his professional value, Sandra responded. And Ms. Hale has maintained clear boundaries. Mr. Cole reports to property managers, not directly to her. His promotions were based on merit and results, not personal favoritism. Then let's ask Mr. Cole directly. Brennan turned to the judge. Your Honor, we'd like to call Ethan Cole to testify about the nature of his relationship with Ms. Hale and the circumstances of his employment. Mwasi. Judge Moreno nodded. Mr. Cole, please approach. Ethan stood, legs unsteady, and walked to the witness stand. The bailiff swore him in. He put his hand on the Bible and promised to tell the truth. And then he was sitting there with everyone staring at him. Richard Hale with calculation, Vanessa with barely concealed fear, the judge with neutral assessment. Brennan approached like a shark sensing blood. Mr. Cole, how long have you known Miss Hale? About 4 months. And in those 4 months, you went from maintenance worker to facilities director? Yes. That's quite a rapid rise. What qualified you for such responsibility? Ethan met his eyes. Results. I fixed problems that had been bleeding money for years. Exposed fraud. Prevented equipment failures. Saved the company hundreds of thousands of dollars. Or Ms. Hale promoted you because you were dating. No, she promoted me because I earned it. Bombas. Brennan smiled thinly. Let's talk about how you met. You picked Ms. Hale up in a rainstorm, correct? Yes. Stranded, vulnerable, you saw an opportunity? I saw someone who needed help. And 3 days later, she offered you a job. Convenient. She offered me a chance to prove myself, Ethan corrected, which I did. Brennan paced, hands behind his back. When did the relationship become romantic? About 6 weeks after I started working. 6 weeks. And who initiated it? Wait. Ethan hesitated, knowing this was a trap. It was mutual. But you work for her. That creates a power dynamic, doesn't it? Makes you vulnerable to her influence? Or makes her vulnerable to accusations like this? Ethan shot back. I'm here because I'm good at my job. Not because of who I'm dating. You have a daughter, correct? 9 years old? Ethan's blood went cold. Leave her out of this. I'm simply establishing context. You're a single father, struggling financially, raising a child alone. Then you meet a wealthy CEO who offers you a high-paying job and... Stop. Ethan's voice was hard. You want to imply I used my daughter to manipulate Vanessa? That I put Sophie in front of a CEO like bait? That's sick. And it's wrong. Brennan raised an eyebrow. I'm suggesting that Ms. Hale's attachment to your daughter influenced her professional decisions. Vanessa cares about Sophie because Sophie's a good kid, not because it gets her anything. And Sophie loves Vanessa because Vanessa treats her like she matters, not like a tool or a weapon or evidence in a court case. Ethan leaned forward. You want the truth? Here it is. I was drowning before I met Vanessa, working 2 jobs, barely keeping the lights on, wondering if I was ruining my daughter's life through sheer incompetence. Vanessa gave me a shot when no one else would. Not because she felt sorry for me, not because she wanted something, because she saw I could do the work, and I proved her right. The courtroom was silent. Brennan's expression flickered, not quite uncertainty, but close. No further questions. Sandra stood for redirect. Mr. Cole, in your professional opinion, is Ms. Hale competent to run Hale Hospitality? Absolutely. Has your relationship affected her business judgment? No. She's held me to the same standards as everyone else. Higher, actually, because she knows people are watching. Would you have accepted the position if you thought it was charity? Ways. Ethan looked at Vanessa, who was watching him with tears she was fighting to control. No. I've lived on charity. This wasn't that. This was an opportunity to prove I'm more than circumstances made me look. Sandra nodded. Thank you. No further questions. Ethan stepped down, legs shaking, and returned to his seat. Ethan stepped. Vanessa didn't turn around, but he saw her shoulders relax slightly. Richard Hale took the stand next, polished and practiced, testifying about his late wife's vision and his concern for the company's future. About Vanessa's grief clouding her judgment, about reckless spending and emotional decisions. He made it sound almost reasonable, almost like he actually cared. But Sandra tore into him on cross-examination. Mr. Hale, you filed this suit 6 months after your wife's death. Why wait? I was grieving, Richard said smoothly. Or you were waiting to see if your daughter would fail on her own? Sandra pulled out documents. You approached 3 board members about replacing Vanessa as CEO before you filed this motion. You tried to gather votes for a no-confidence measure. Richard's expression tightened. I was concerned. You were positioning yourself to take control. Sandra presented emails, meeting notes, proof of Richard's maneuvering. This isn't about protecting your wife's legacy. It's about taking something you never built and never cared about until it became profitable. That's not... You haven't attended a board meeting in 5 years, haven't visited a property, haven't shown any interest in operations until you filed this suit. Isn't that true? Richard's lawyer objected, but the damage was done. The judge had seen the documentation, the timeline of Richard's sudden involvement. It looked exactly like what it was, a power grab. Vanessa testified last, and Ethan watched her transform into the CEO, who'd built 6 hotels into profitable operations while grieving her mother. She was clear, direct, unemotional about facts while being honest about feelings. Did your relationship with Mr. Cole influence your decision to promote him? Brennan asked. No. His work influenced that decision. The relationship developed separately, after he'd already proven his value. You don't see a conflict of interest? Well, I see a competent employee who happens to also be someone I care about. Those aren't mutually exclusive. Vanessa looked at her father. My mother taught me to recognize talent and nurture it. That's what I did with Ethan. The fact that I also fell in love with him doesn't erase his qualifications or accomplishments. Love, Brennan repeated. You're in love with your employee. Yes. And you think that's appropriate? I think it's honest, Vanessa said. I could lie about it, pretend it's just professional, keep everything separate and neat. But my mother also taught me that denying reality doesn't change it. Ethan and I are together. That's real. His competence is also real. Both things can be true. Brennan tried to push further, but Vanessa didn't crack. She answered every question with the same calm directness, refusing to be baited into emotional responses that would support their narrative. Finally, Judge Moreno called for closing arguments. Sandra went first, summarizing the evidence of Ethan's competence, Vanessa's sound judgment, Richard's opportunistic timing. Brennan countered with concerns about appearance of impropriety, about the risks of emotional decision-making in corporate leadership. Then Judge Moreno called a recess to review the materials. They waited in a conference room down the hall, Vanessa pacing while her lawyers reviewed notes, and Ethan sat in a chair that was too small for his frame, wondering if he'd just destroyed everything by admitting he loved her in open court. "You okay?" Vanessa asked quietly, stopping her pacing to stand beside him. "No idea." "You did good up there. Really good." "Did I? Or did I just hand them ammunition?" "You told the truth." Vanessa's hand found his. "That's all we could do." An hour later, they were called back. Judge Moreno had papers in front of her, reading glasses perched on her nose, expression unreadable. "I've reviewed the testimony and documentation," she said. "This case comes down to a question of competence and judgment. Mr. Hale argues his daughter is unfit to lead due to emotional instability and poor decision-making. The evidence doesn't support that conclusion." Ethan felt Vanessa's hand tighten in his. Ms. Hale's hiring of Mr. Cole was unconventional but demonstrably successful. The documentation shows significant cost savings, improved operations, and professional conduct from both parties. While the romantic relationship creates optics issues, it doesn't constitute evidence of impaired judgment. Judge Moreno looked at Richard Hale. "What I see here is a father attempting to use his daughter's personal life as justification for a corporate takeover. That's not grounds for removing a competent CEO." Richard's face went dark. "However," Judge Moreno continued, and Ethan's stomach dropped, "the appearance of conflict of interest cannot be ignored entirely. Ms. Hale, moving forward, Mr. Cole cannot report to you in any capacity, directly or indirectly. He needs clear separation in the chain of command." "We can arrange that," Sandra said quickly. "See that you do." Judge Moreno turned to Richard. "As for your petition for emergency control, it's denied. Ms. Hale retains full authority as CEO. This matter is dismissed." The gavel came down. For a moment, nobody moved. Then Vanessa made a sound that was half laugh, half sob, and turned to hug her lawyers. Richard Hale stood abruptly and left without a word, Brennan trailing behind, both of them rigid with barely controlled fury. Ethan sat there feeling like the floor had dropped out from under him, and he was still somehow standing. They won. Outside the courthouse, Vanessa stopped on the steps, breathing in cold air like she'd been underwater. Her lawyers dispersed with promises to follow up on paperwork. Richard's car pulled away, tinted windows hiding whatever rage was happening inside. "We won," Vanessa said, like she was testing the words. "You won," Ethan corrected. "We." She looked at him. "I couldn't have done that alone." "Sure you could have." "No." Vanessa shook her head. "I would have settled, would have given him partial control to avoid the fight. You made me believe I could win." Ethan pulled her close, right there on the courthouse steps with people walking past. "You always could. You just forgot for a while." They stood there while the city moved around them. Two people who'd found each other by accident and chosen each other on purpose, despite every reason not to. Eventually, they'd have to deal with the aftermath, the gossip, the restructuring, the fact that their relationship was now public record. But right now, in this moment, they just held each other and breathed. Ethan's phone rang. "Sophie," he answered immediately. "Hey, kiddo. Did you win?" Her voice was breathless with hope. "Yeah, we won." Sophie shrieked so loud he had to pull the phone away from his ear. In the background, Marcus's daughter laughed. "Can I talk to Vanessa?" Ethan handed over the phone. Vanessa's expression softened as Sophie chattered about something, probably plans for celebration or questions about when she could come over, or a dozen other things that 9-year-olds considered urgent. "I miss you too," Vanessa said into the phone. "Yes, we can have dinner tonight, whatever you want." She glanced at Ethan. "Your dad says pizza. Does that work?" A pause. "Okay, see you soon. Love you." She hung up and handed the phone back, and Ethan realized that was the first time he'd heard Vanessa say those words to Sophie. The first time she'd claimed that relationship out loud, made it real instead of implied. "You okay?" he asked. "Yeah." Vanessa smiled, genuine and tired. "I think I finally am." The weeks that followed were messy in ways that couldn't be fixed with a court ruling. Richard Hale made one final attempt at corporate warfare, trying to call a board vote on Vanessa's leadership. But the board, which had seen the court documents and Ethan's results, and Vanessa's steady leadership through crisis, voted unanimously to keep her as CEO. Richard resigned from the board entirely after that, taking a settlement that gave him enough money to disappear but no power over the company. Staff gossip gradually shifted from scandal to grudging acceptance, helped by the fact that Ethan kept proving he'd earned his position. The new reporting structure put him under Patricia, the VP of operations, who made it clear she didn't care who he was dating as long as the work got done. And the work did get done. Harbor House renovation staying on schedule, equipment failures continuing to drop, vendor relationships strengthening through fair dealing and honest communication. But the real work was at home, in the small moments that made up actual life. Sophie's homework spread across Vanessa's dining table, while Vanessa attempted to help with math, and Ethan corrected them both. Dinners that burned because nobody was watching the stove. Arguments about bedtime and piano practice, and whether ice cream counted as dinner if it had fruit in it. "This is harder than I expected," Vanessa admitted one night after Sophie had finally gone to sleep following an hour of negotiations about reading one more chapter. "What, parenting?" Ethan was loading the dishwasher, a task that had somehow become his in the division of household labor they were still figuring out. All of it, the domesticity. "I spent so long being just the CEO that I forgot how to be a person who does laundry and grocery shopping and listens to 9-year-olds explain Minecraft." "You're doing fine." "I burnt pasta last week. How do you burn pasta?" Ethan smiled despite himself. "You get distracted by work emails and forget you're cooking. See, I'm terrible at this." He dried his hands and went to her, pulling her close. "You're not terrible. You're learning. That's different." Sophie deserves better than someone who's learning. Sophie deserves someone who cares enough to try, Ethan corrected. "Which you do, every day, even when you burn pasta." Vanessa laughed against his shoulder. "When did you get so wise?" 3 years of single parenting. It either makes you wise or it breaks you. And you? Little bit of both, Ethan admitted. "But I'm still here." "Yeah, you are." Pulled back to look at him. "Thank you for that. For being here. For not running when things got complicated." "Where would I run to?" Ethan asked. "Everything I want is right here." And it was true. The apartment he still technically lived in sat mostly empty now, a backup plan neither of them acknowledged. Most nights found them at Vanessa's place. 3 people learning how to be a family without a manual or guarantee it would work. December came with its own complications. Sophie's school concert, where she played a solo that made Ethan's throat tight, and Vanessa reached for his hand without thinking. Holiday parties where Ethan still felt out of place among people who thought nothing of $100 bottles of wine. Family photos that Sophie insisted they take. All 3 of them squeezed onto Vanessa's couch, trying to look natural while the timer counted down. "We look ridiculous," Vanessa said, reviewing the photos later. "We look happy," Sophie corrected from where she was supposed to be doing homework. "That's better than looking good." Ethan met Vanessa's eyes over Sophie's head, and something passed between them. Agreement that Sophie was probably right, that happiness mattered more than appearance, that the messy, imperfect thing they were building was more valuable than any polished pretense. The Harbor House had its grand reopening the week before Christmas. Ethan stood in the lobby he'd helped restore, watching guests arrive, and felt that quiet pride again. The building looked good, not perfect, but solid, like something that would last, like something worth the work it took to save it. "You should be proud," Marcus said, appearing beside him with a beer someone had smuggled in, despite this being a formal event. "Place looks better than it has in 20 years. Couldn't have done it without your crew." "Bullshit. You knew what needed fixing and you fixed it. That's all on you." Marcus took a drink. "My daughter told me about the court case. Said you testified." "Yeah." "That took guts. Standing up there, making it public." Ethan shrugged. "Wasn't much choice." "There's always a choice. You could have walked away, taken a severance, found another job. But you stayed and fought." Marcus looked at him seriously. "That matters, not just for her, but for Sophie. Showing her that you don't abandon people when things get hard." The observation hit deeper than Ethan expected. He'd spent 3 years after Rachel's death just trying to survive, teaching Sophie through actions that life was about endurance. But maybe this, fighting for Vanessa, fighting for the future they were building, taught Sophie something different. That sometimes you didn't just endure. Sometimes you fought for something better. "How is Sophie?" Marcus asked. "Good. Happy. Talks about Vanessa constantly." Ethan smiled slightly. "Asks when we're getting married at least once a week." And? And I don't know. It's fast. 4 months. Maybe too fast. Or maybe when you know, you know. Marcus finished his beer. "My wife and I got engaged after 3 months. Been married 38 years. Time doesn't mean anything if the feeling's right." Vanessa found them a few minutes later looking exhausted but satisfied. The event was a success, fully booked through New Year's, great press coverage, board members actually complimenting her vision. She'd done what she'd set out to do, proved her mother's company could thrive under her leadership. "Can we go home?" she asked quietly, and Ethan heard the exhaustion underneath. "Yeah, let's go home." They collected Sophie from where she was charming the catering staff into giving her extra desserts, and drove through the city decorated for Christmas. Lights everywhere, shoppers rushing through last-minute errands, the whole world leaning into the idea that this time of year meant something special. "What do you want for Christmas?" Sophie asked from the back seat. "I don't need anything," Vanessa said automatically. "That's not what I asked. What do you want?" "This." Vanessa glanced at Ethan, then back at Sophie in the rearview mirror. "Honestly, this. Right here. You two. That's all I want." "That's boring," Sophie declared. "You should want jewelry or fancy stuff." "Why?" "Because that's what rich people want in movies." Ethan laughed. "Life isn't a movie, kiddo." "It should be. Movies have better endings." But this ending, messy and uncertain as it was, felt more real than anything scripted. They got home and Sophie immediately claimed the bathroom for her nightly routine that somehow took 45 minutes. Ethan and Vanessa collapsed on the couch, that comfortable exhaustion of people who'd survived a long day together. "Thank you," Vanessa said, "for tonight, for Harbor House, for everything. You keep thanking me." "Because I keep being grateful." Ethan pulled her close, and they sat there in silence, listening to Sophie sing off-key in the bathroom. This was the life they'd built from a rainstorm and a job offer, and a series of choices that could have gone differently at any point. Every time they could have walked away, they'd chosen to stay. Every time it would have been easier to quit, they'd fought instead. That was the thing about love, Ethan was learning. It wasn't the dramatic moments or grand gestures. It was the small choice to keep showing up, to burn pasta and laugh about it, to sit through piano lessons and school concerts, to testify in court and mean the words you said, to build a future one ordinary day at a time, trusting that ordinary could be extraordinary if you were with the right people. Christmas morning came with chaos. Sophie up at 6 demanding they open presents, Vanessa stumbling out of the bedroom looking like she'd been hit by a truck, Ethan trying to make coffee while Sophie narrated every gift she found under the tree. "This one's for you, Dad. This one's for Vanessa. This one's for me. This one's for... Dad, why are you looking at me like that?" "Because you're happy," Ethan said simply. "And that makes me happy." Sophie rolled her eyes with the profound exasperation of 9-year-olds everywhere. "You're so cheesy." "Yeah, I am." They opened presents in a pile of wrapping paper and ribbon, Sophie's excitement making everything feel more important than it was. Ethan had gotten Vanessa a set of actual cooking lessons, which made her laugh and cry simultaneously. Vanessa had gotten Ethan tools for the Harbor House workshop he'd been setting up, professional-grade equipment he'd never have bought himself. And Sophie got books and art supplies and a letter saying she'd been accepted into the advanced piano program with a full scholarship Vanessa had arranged. "Wait, really?" Sophie's eyes went huge. "Really?" Vanessa confirmed. "You earned it. Mrs. Chen wrote the recommendation herself." Sophie launched herself at Vanessa, hugging her with the fierce gratitude of a kid whose dreams were becoming possible. And Ethan watched them, his daughter and the woman he'd fallen for, and felt something settle in his chest that had been unsettled for 3 years. This was family, imperfect and complicated and nothing like what he'd had before, but real, built on choice instead of obligation, on fighting for each other instead of just coexisting, built on the understanding that love wasn't about perfect circumstances or smooth paths. It was about seeing someone clearly, flaws and fears and all, and choosing them anyway. Later, after Sophie had fallen asleep on the couch surrounded by her new books, Ethan and Vanessa stood by the windows watching snow fall over the city. "I've been thinking," Vanessa said quietly. "About? Wait. This. Us. What happens next?" She turned to face him. "I know it's fast. I know there are 1,000 practical reasons to wait. But I don't want to wait, Ethan. I want this to be permanent. Official. I want Sophie to be mine legally, not just emotionally. I want—" She stopped, swallowing hard. "I want to marry you." Ethan stared at her, heart pounding. "Are you proposing?" "I'm saying I love you and I want a future that doesn't have an expiration date. If that's a proposal, then yes." "That's terrible proposal," Ethan said, but he was smiling. "No ring, no plan, just blurting it out on Christmas. I'm not good at romance. I'm good at business and fixing problems and apparently burning pasta." Vanessa's voice cracked. "But I'm trying to be good at this, at us, and that means being honest about what I want. So yes, this is a terrible proposal, but it's also true." Ethan pulled her close, breathing in the scent of her shampoo and the faint smell of pine from the tree Sophie had insisted they get. "Ask me again in a month. When we've survived the post-holiday disaster and you've had time to think clearly, will your answer be different?" "No, but you should be sure." "I am sure." "Then humor me anyway." He kissed her forehead. "Let's do this right. Not because we're rushing or proving something to someone else, but because it's what we both want." Vanessa nodded against his shoulder. "Okay, a month." That month passed faster than either expected. The Harbor House continued thriving. Ethan's new reporting structure worked smoothly. Sophie started her advanced program and came home each week with new pieces to practice, harder than before but manageable. The three of them settled into rhythms that felt sustainable. Weeknight dinners at home, weekend explorations of the city, quiet evenings where work and stress faded into the background. And somewhere in that month, Ethan bought a ring. Nothing extravagant, just a simple band that looked like Vanessa. Elegant, understated, built to last. He carried it in his pocket for a week, waiting for the right moment, then realized there wasn't going to be a perfect moment. There was just life, messy and ordinary. And sometimes you had to make moments matter instead of waiting for them to appear. So one Tuesday evening, after dinner, when Sophie was practicing piano and Vanessa was reviewing quarterly reports on the couch, Ethan sat beside her and took her hand. "What?" she asked, not looking up from the spreadsheet. "Marry me." Vanessa's head snapped up. "What?" "You heard me. Marry me. Not because it's been a month, or because you proposed first, or because Sophie keeps asking. Marry me because I love you, and I want to build a life with you that lasts longer than court cases and crisis management." "You said to wait a month." "I changed my mind." He pulled out the ring. "This is me asking properly. With a ring, an actual planning, and the understanding that I'm probably going to screw up 1,000 things, but I'll keep trying anyway." "Marry me, Vanessa." She looked at the ring, then at him, then at Sophie, who'd stopped playing piano and was watching them with barely contained excitement. "Did you tell her?" "No, she's just perceptive." "Is that a yes?" Sophie called from the piano. Vanessa laughed, tears starting. "Yeah, that's a yes." Sophie shrieked and came running, crashing into them on the couch. All three of them tangled together in the kind of messy joy that couldn't be photographed or performed, just felt. "When's the wedding?" Sophie demanded. "We literally got engaged 30 seconds ago," Ethan said. "So, when?" Vanessa looked at Ethan, something passing between them. "Summer," she said. "Small. Just family. I can invite friends, though, right?" "Yes, you can invite friends." "And can I be in the wedding?" "You're the most important person in the wedding," Vanessa said seriously. "Neither of us would be here without you." It was true. Sophie's presence had been the thread connecting them from the beginning. Her kindness in the rainstorm, her excitement about Vanessa, her clear belief that the three of them belonged together. She'd made this family possible through nothing more than being herself. The engagement made the news, of course. CEO Vanessa Hale to marry facilities director. The articles were surprisingly kind, most of them focusing on the court victory, and the success of Harbor House, rather than the scandal of an employer marrying an employee. The comments sections were less kind, but Ethan had learned to stop reading those. What mattered was the life they were building. The wedding planning that Sophie threw herself into with enthusiasm that bordered on tyrannical. The conversations about combining households officially, about whether to sell Ethan's apartment or keep it, about how to blend their finances in ways that felt fair. The ordinary work of taking separate lives and braiding them into something shared. "Are you scared?" Vanessa asked one night, lying in bed while Sophie slept in her room down the hall. "Of what?" "This, marriage, the permanence of it." Ethan thought about that honestly. "Yeah, sometimes. I spent 3 years thinking I'd used up my chance at happiness. That Rachel was it and everything after was just survival. Being wrong about that is terrifying. But being right about you is worth the fear." Vanessa curled against him. "I'm scared too. My mother's marriage to my father was a disaster. I don't know how to do this differently. See, we figure it out together, make mistakes and fix them. That's all anyone does." "Is it enough?" "It has to be," Ethan said, "because perfect doesn't exist and waiting for it means never starting." They were married in June, on a Saturday that threatened rain, but held off long enough for the ceremony. Small, like they'd promised, just Sophie and Marcus's family and Vanessa's lawyers who'd become friends, and a handful of staff members who'd supported them through everything. The venue was Harbor House, because it felt right to celebrate in a building they'd saved together. Sophie stood with them as they exchanged vows, words they'd written themselves about choosing each other daily, about building futures from broken pieces, about family being something you created rather than something you were born into. Ethan cried, which he'd promised himself he wouldn't do. Vanessa held his hand so tight it hurt. Sophie beamed like she'd personally orchestrated the whole thing. And when the officiant pronounced them married, when they kissed to applause that echoed through the lobby, Ethan had restored. When Sophie hugged them both and whispered that she was happy, Ethan felt something he'd thought was gone forever. Wholeness. Not the absence of pain or fear or uncertainty, but the presence of people worth fighting for, worth building with, worth choosing every single day despite the complications. The reception was exactly as chaotic as expected. Sophie gave a speech that made everyone cry, talking about how her dad had been sad for so long and now he smiled again. Marcus gave a toast about recognizing good people when you met them and having the courage to bet on them. Sandra Chen, Vanessa's lawyer, gave a surprisingly emotional tribute to watching her client find happiness after years of fighting. And Vanessa, dancing with Ethan while Sophie twirled nearby with Marcus's granddaughter, leaned close and whispered, "Thank you for stopping in the rain." "Thank you for standing there waiting," Ethan replied, because that was the truth at the heart of their story. Two people who could have given up, who had every reason to keep driving, to stay isolated, to protect themselves from more pain, but they'd chosen differently. Chosen to stop, to help, to see each other clearly, and decide that was enough. Life after the wedding wasn't smooth. There were still arguments about money and parenting and how much time Vanessa spent working. Still moments when Ethan felt out of place in her world, or Vanessa struggled with the domesticity she'd never learned. Still days when grief for the people they'd lost crept in unexpected. But there were also mornings where Sophie made them all breakfast in bed, barely edible but made with love. Evenings where Vanessa actually succeeded at cooking a full meal without disaster. Weekends exploring the city as a family, Sophie between them, holding both their hands. Quiet nights where they collapsed exhausted and happy onto the couch, knowing they'd wake up and do it all again tomorrow. And slowly, gradually, what had started as survival became something else. Became a life built on purpose, on choice, on the understanding that the best things often came from the hardest fights. That stopping in the rain for a stranger could lead to family. That broken people could heal together if they were willing to try. 1 year after they'd met, on another autumn night threatening rain, Ethan stood on Vanessa's balcony, their balcony now, and thought about that flooded intersection. About the 3 seconds he'd had to decide whether to stop or keep driving. About how that single choice had changed everything. Sophie was inside doing homework with Vanessa's help, both of them arguing about fractions with the kind of comfortable bickering that came from family. The city glowed below. Millions of lives playing out in parallel, everyone making their own choices that would ripple forward in ways they couldn't predict. "Dad?" Sophie called. Vanessa says you can explain this better. Coming, he called back, leaving the balcony and the philosophical moment behind. Because that was the real lesson he'd learned. Life wasn't about perfect decisions or smooth paths. It was about showing up, about doing the work even when it was hard, about choosing people and fighting for them and building futures from whatever pieces you had available. It was about seeing someone standing in the rain and choosing not to look away. And sometimes, if you were lucky, that choice led you home.